47. Chapter 47, Interlude Politics and Dancing. The slippery broomstick gentleman's club Rufus Scrimgeour was too much the Slytherin and professional to show any reaction to deciding the leadership of Wizarding Britain in a booth by the main stage of an exotic dance club. Alastair Moody was simply administering 17 different tests for poisons, potions, curses, and anchovies on the nachos ordered for the table. Alastair didn't mind a good assassination, but anchovies had no business in food. Lord Sirius Orion Black had summoned them, surprisingly enough, he commanding the third largest voting block in the Wizigamot, or possibly second. It depended on the body identification on some of the Death Eaters whose bodies had been less than intact at the World Cup. Those that had not been properly identified and heirs elevated in time for the next session could not, of course, vote. The decision on the next minister was all anyone could talk about. Fudge was deader than Harry's chances to make prefect. I think the last time I was here, I was raiding the place. Rufus said, reminiscing. Me too, said Mad Eye Moody, taking a chip and dipping it while his extra eye tracked a dancer showing a great deal of enthusiasm, flexibility, and thigh. And I was arresting that one. Moody said, pointing at Sirius, who chucked and grabbed his own chip. Rufus looked at him disapprovingly. Got fresh with one of the dancers, Black. I thought better of you. Sirius looked offended. I was a perfect gentleman at all times. I'll have you know I wasn't even in the audience when the raid hit. Scrimgeour looked at Moody. Black was dancing on the main stage. His mother bribed Barty Crouch Sr. to raid the place. Claimed young Sirius was performing lewd acts on stage. Sirius smiled, remembering. Wicked Witch Wednesdays. God, I miss those. Did the first one when I lost a bet with James. Then it was a riot, so I did Wednesdays and Saturdays until dear old Mom got a glowing review from 6 of her garden party hens at the big fundraiser for St. Mungo's. I think Griselda Marchbanks has a signed poster from that run posted in her study. Then Sirius winced. When Wahlburger's howler got to the Potters and went off, it dissolved the coffee table, and we had to replace the tiles. I like to think that took years off her life. Rufus Scrimgeour rubbed at his forehead and muttered, and this is the best hope for political stability in Britain. Moody passed over his flask, and Rufus took a big swig, breathed out a burst of fire, then grabbed a chip. Sirius turned to look at Rufus, and his smile was suddenly a thing of sufficient power to make Rufus nearly choke on his chip. Sirius spoke swiftly and quietly, without any drama or emotion. Rufus, you are here looking for our support as the next Minister of Magic. You know Cornelius Fudge is going to fall when the House meets next. Everyone with half a brain cell knows it, and the ones without a brain cell have aides that will at least try to explain it to them. Well, I like you, and I think you have a lot to offer. That is why you are not getting my support. Sirius said, then took a sip of his own whiskey and saluted the dancer with his glass and a golden galleon tossed onto the stage. Scrimgeour looked shocked. You won't support me? He asked. Moody snorted. Rufus, the auras have been cut to the bone every year since Fudge took office. Those that survived the cuts did so not because they were good, but because they were connected. Most of those connections had tattoos on their left forearm they don't like to talk about in mixed company. War is coming. Dumbledore and his light faction won't let the auras hunt Death Eaters before it starts because they deserve a second chance. Parkinson and his dark faction won't let auras hunt Death Eaters because that is about half the dark faction. And they really want the ones Voldemort trained himself when the balloon goes up, because the difference between those he trained and the pathetic crap coming out of Hogwarts under Dumbledore is like dragons versus ducks. When the war starts, Dumbledore and his light faction won't let the auras defend themselves with lethal curses because Death Eaters deserve a second chance. Parkinson and his dark faction won't let auras defend themselves with lethal curses because he wants as many of the innocent auras dead before he openly declares for Voldemort again and overthrows the ministry. Scrimgeour looked between the two ex-auras in horror. You don't think we can win? Sirius barked laughter that was bitter as it was rich. Of course not. What we can do is preserve those people we are going to need to win the next war, my war. Once the Ministry and Dumbledore's faithful order of sacrificial idiots have handed Voldemort victory on a plate, Harry is going to teach Voldemort he lost the day he let Harry live. Scrimgeour made a face, and sipped his whiskey. I won't be there when it matters. If I am not minister, I will still be head aura when the war starts, even if they kick me to the curb when it starts. Once the bodies start piling up, I will be reactivated. You know, the ones on the take will make sure I die bravely before they openly switch sides. Alistair laughed, then dug an improbable amount of salsa onto his natch. Oh, I have just the place to keep you safe. Hogwarts. They need a new Dada instructor, and I dropped a word with Minnie to make sure you got suggested when Dumbledore fired me. Didn't even get a first day before firing. That has to be a first. Rufus looked shocked. How did you get fired? You were always Dumbledore's hatchet man. When he got done talking peace, love, and happiness, you got sent, and we were wiping up blood and body parts for at least a shift, plus the report writing. Sirius laughed again. Told the git of the greater good where he could stuff his Order of the Noble Sacrifice badge and asked me to sign up right in front of him. I thought Albus was going to blow a vein. Scrimgeour chuckled. That would do it. Dumbledore likes to paint himself as the kind grandfather, but no one defies him openly and survives, or at least not their career. Not as open about it as Lucius used to be, but the end results are about the same. Scrimgeour sighed. It's all just whistling in a graveyard anyway. Harry Potter killed Voldemort back in 1981, and that still didn't stop him. I don't know what I can do that will make a difference. Oh sure, I had plans to deal with the Death Eaters, but how do you stop a man you can't kill? Moody laughed. Potter's killed him more than once. The kid's a nasty piece of work. Gathered a bunch of kids just about as nasty. Turned Neville Longbottom into someone about 3 times as deadly as Frank or Alice at their best, and I doubt he even has pubic hair yet. He's got 2 dark families taking his orders already, and he's got people in every Hogwarts house backing him. Scrimgeour eyed Moody, weighing his words, then turned to Sirius for clarification. The Ministry has to fall. The rot is too deep. They are turning on Harry now for the crime of not wanting to be sacrificed while they lose the war. Dumbledore, the Ministry, they both have to fall before we can win the war. Sirius said coldly. Scrimgeour sighed. If the Ministry falls, the people will lose hope. Without Dumbledore to rally around, say what you will, the whole champion of light thing is what kept everyone fighting the last time. What can Harry do that will get all of Wizarding Britain off their asses and into the fight? Sirius smirked. Rufus, back in Aura training, you were brought in to test our occlumency. You were the best ledgermens we actually trusted. Have you kept in practice? Scrimgeour looked at Sirius, then nodded slowly. Sirius met his eyes and waggled his eyebrows. Rufus palmed his wand and pointed it at Sirius, then whispered Legimens. His mind pushed into Sirius, and he was immediately concerned. Sirius' mind he had known from Aura training. Rufus had been sure he could defeat Sirius shields, unless you were a specialist like Rufus. Your shields rarely developed enough depth and complexity to hide anything from a truly powerful Legimens given time and leisure to probe. Sirius' mind had changed. The mind was not the brick wall for Rufus to batter and plunder like he expected. It was like pushing into a mass of coils, sliding and slithering coils of a dark snake whose eyes and gaze he could feel upon him. Rufus was suddenly glad he had permission, because his instincts were screaming at him that if he had pushed his way in uninvited, he might not get to leave. Pushing deeper, following the only path that opened for him, Scrimgeour saw a vision, an island he knew well and hated. A dragon blazed in the sky above, and a castle burned. Rufus recoiled in shock, yanking himself out of Sirius' mind in terror. You can't be serious, Rufus whispered. The very idea of a boy leading an assault on a place that the whole of Wizarding Britain feared to face back when the auras were not a joke shook Scrimgeour to his core. I am always serious, Sirius quipped, then continued seriously. The second we get word the Ministry falls, Harry will move. You think that will wake up the public? Do you think that will make old Moldershorts need a change of underwear? Scrimgeour shuddered. It would make me need a change of underwear. I know these kids aren't scared of them. I saw that for myself, but do you think they can actually win? Moody took a swig from his flask and sighed. I think I would risk my last eye to find out. Rufus smiled. I say, Moody old man, you wouldn't happen to have done any course planning for the whole Dada thing, have you? It would be a shame to waste it. Moody reached into his battered coat and pulled out a tome that looked to contain half the theory and practice of magical violence, but was labeled Dada Done Right. He slid it across to Scrimgeour without comment. As Rufus leafed through it, the old waitress swayed over to their table and leaned over Sirius' shoulder. Lord Black, some of the wait and bar staff were talking to the dancers, and they don't believe us when we told them how you used to drive the witches wild back in the day. You know the back room is available now, and if I recall correctly, when you got arrested back in 1979, you did promise me a rain check. Sirius looked shocked. Esmeralda Macmillan, are you trying to tempt me into taking off my clothes in front of a room full of women I've never even met? I will have you know I am a respectable lord of the Wizigamot. The waitress gave him a long, slow look up and down. A fit one, too. The ladies love a man with a nice, tight political platform in back and serious talking point up front. Rufus shot up an eyebrow. She couldn't possibly think the lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black was going to strip for the wait staff and dancers just for old time's sake. Sirius tossed a handful of galleons on the table. Right you are, Esmeralda. A gentleman pays his debts, and I can't leave that many witches crying in their potions. Rufus watched as Esmeralda Macmillan pinched Lord Black's bottom as he swayed to the music towards the back room, where indeed half the duty waitresses and every off-duty dancer seemed to be waiting for his show. That is the best hope of wizarding Britain. Rufus Scrimgeour, future candidate for post-war Minister of Magic, and potential next semester Dada instructor, whispered in horror. Alastair Mad Eye Moody laughed softly. Desperate times indeed. Trust me, Rufus. Those kids are coming for Voldemort. It isn't just Harry Sirius, and a whole bunch of very capable and very dangerous people are working to make it come to pass, but it is Harry Potter and his friends who are going to war. They are going to finish it or die trying. 48. Chapter 48 Return to School. -12 Grimold Place, dirty, filthy blood traitor. Eek. Walburga Black's portrait howled at her disgraced son from the wall that it could not be removed from. The enchantments of the portrait had cost the revenue of the entire Black estate for a year. It was all but impossible to silence, move, or destroy. Having been unable to cast Sirius from the family when Actress Black, his grandfather, still lived and declared him heir, she had poured every last galleon into making sure not he would rule this house at least. BG, or Best Girl, was a happy basilisk as she could now reach the painting, and every time Walburga would curse at Sirius she could strike at her. The painting shrugged off every magic below fiend fire, but that would risk the whole of Grimold Place. Basilisk venom, on the other hand, was wild magic's answer to decay. If dragon fire was the primal fire of creation, then basilisk venom was wild magic's nod to the second law of thermodynamics, to the process of decay, and the acceptance of death's first maxim: all that lives must die. BG was a very young basilisk by the calendar. Sirius had his care of magical creatures newt, and understood a basilisk of BG's age should be about 3 feet, and very much the occasional hunter of very small prey. BG was now 20 feet long, and a ravenous hunter of everything that couldn't talk to her, including Walburga Black, Mother, Portrait, and Slow Learner. The fang marks healed slowly in the portrait itself, the magic in it fluttering and flickering to deal with the damage, but Walburga had dodged this time. The loss of her right arm had taught her that to be struck by those fangs was to be left the choice of swiftly use her own wand to cut off the offending limb, or simply watch herself dissolve into nothingness. Sirius, you unfilial whelp, you matricidal ingrate, defend your mother. That snake is trying to murder me. Shrieked Walburga, stopping cursing her son long enough to demand he save her. What does the bloated pray say, dogfather? BG said, swaying back and forth to lure Walburga into stillness so she cold strike her again. Sirius read his daily prophet and smiled as he sipped his morning tea. She says, na, you can't catch me. BG's eyes flared as she was challenged, and she struck again, this time catching a bit of Walburga's gown, leaving the desperate witch no choice but to cut off half her skirt to stop the venom from dissolving her legs and costing her the ability to dodge. Showing a lot of leg there, mother. What would father say? Hardly proper for a lady of your breeding. What sort of example are you setting for BG? She is my god-granddaughter and a snake of impressionable age. I won't have her corrupted by your casually stripping in the hallway. Sirius chuckled, waggling his finger at the portrait. Walburga howled. You degenerate blood traitor. You shamed the House of Black by stripping in a nightclub just last night, eek. Wahlburger's attack had distracted her enough to get caught again on the rest of her skirt, causing Wahlburger to have to cut it away frantically. Now she was in a huge, flowing Edwardian ball gown with bustle that ended like a miniskirt. This is a fun game, hissed BG happily. Remus came in frowning. Have you seen the prophet? Filthy mongrel cur, how dare you shame the House of Eek? Wahlburger greeted Remus with the start of her usual anti-werewolf rant. Morning, Wahlburger, said Remus. Morning, BG, he hissed. Mooney, the howling one has legs. Look, I made her show them, hissed a happy BG. Sirius got up and scratched her head, causing the snake to lean back into his touch like the decadent little murder noodle she was becoming. Who's my best girl? You are my best girl. Yes, you are, Remus sighed. You are a bad influence on that basilisk. Had you asked me in 7th year when we were doing our care of magical creatures, Newt, I would have bet any money even you could not corrupt a basilisk. Sirius chucked. And you would have lost. I tempted Griselda Marchbanks to stick a galleon between my cheeks because Tamara Ogden had nicked my thong. I hid out from Death Eaters in a cave with a yogi who had spent 110 years moving past all worldly desires and taught him to blow fire rings with fire whiskey and sing dirty songs in Hindi and English by day 3. We had got as far as lighting farts with our wands before I got the all clear. I must say, never enter that competition with a vegetarian. They will win. Remus just shook his head. Why can't you be reasonable like Papa Noodle? Begged Remus. Sirius looked up in confusion. Where is your basilisk, anyway? Remus smirked. Passed out in the main solar under the big window, enjoying the morning sun like a rational snake. Sirius, if you could actually be serious for a second, what do you think about the news in the Prophet? Sirius let his shoulders slump for a second. Cornelius Fudge is out. Barty Crouch SR is elected, and good old Dumbledore was his backer. Parkinson was defeated at least, but Crouch is in and has some sort of detent with old Dumbledore. They both colluded to keep me in Azkaban. They both have a problem with Harry being off-leash. Short term, it is a problem. Long term, we set them up as the thing Voldemort has to kill to reach power. He turned and looked at his old friend, a new steward of House Black. Remus, you met with Skeeter and made sure she would be there for the start of year and the announcements. It is critical that when Dumbledore and Crouch reveal what they are planning for this year, that Harry and his gang can upstage them in front of the press. They need him silenced, and I am not liking the rumors of how they are going about doing it. He needs to be someone that every witch and wizard thinks about, knows about, and absolutely trusts is independent of both the ministry and our dear old puppet master Dumbledore. Remus looked at his old friend. Rita Skeeter will be there. How you can trust she will run the story you want, not side with them, I don't know. Sirius smiled. Because Rita is a shark. How she came out a stag beetle animagus, I don't know. Her soul is a shark, and both Barty Crouch and Dumbledore are trailing so much blood the water is almost chum. I have sold her on the fact that our dear little Harry is a goblin who went swimming in political waters for the first time because he has a taste for whales. Like a good little shark, she will follow our dear Harry and be ready for any new wounds he opens up, so she can get her little shark teeth in there first for her pound of flesh. No, my good Remus. I have made my entire career out of tempting women. Rita Skeeter lives to bring the powerful down, to tear down legends. She is a little person who has been trampled on her entire life and now lives only to bring the big ones down. If she goes after Harry, he doesn't actually care if the public likes him, could give a fig about Wizigamot votes, doesn't even really care if anyone who isn't inside his clan believes him about Voldemort. He is almost untouchable by Skeeter. Dumbledore and Fudge, on the other hand, are political and social giants whose feet are very much turning to sand, and are about one good push away from falling down and going boom very loudly. Rita couldn't ignore this story any more than I could pass by a Villeneuve volleyball tournament. Sirius smiled. Besides, I would pay 1,000 galleons just to see Severus' face when Harry gives his little gift. If Skeeter gets a shot of it, I will have it framed and hang it across from Wahlburger so she has no choice but to look at it. Ought to find out if you can give a portrait a heart attack. It is what killed Mom in the first place. The two surviving marauders shared a laugh, and between Grim and Werewolf, their laugh had more of fang and death by moonlight than anything resembling humor. Hogwarts Express Platform 934. Aura Proudfoot stopped Hermione. Luggage inspection. Open your trunks. Hermione frowned. This is Platform 934. This is Hogwarts territory. Aura's authority ended at the platform edge according to the Treaty of Hogwarts. Aura Proudfoot sneered. Well, Headmaster Dumbledore decided you students were in need of moral guidance, and has volunteered to allow ministerial guidance under a ministerial inquisitor who has posted auras to make sure no contraband gets into Hogwarts. Inquisitor Umbridge has declared that auras shall search as they deem necessary any suspicious students or obvious dissidents. Harry, Neville, and Millicent had drifted over. Harry had slid his wand into his hand. Neville was looking worried, but Millicent had slid her hand over to cover Harry's wand hand. Giving a small headshake, she indicated that they should watch and let Hermione handle it. Hermione raised one eyebrow and tossed her mass of brown, bushy hair like a centurion's crest as she prepared to dress down a particularly stupid legionary during inspection. Hermione began to project her voice in the way Millicent had coached her, not shouting, never shouting because that denoted a loss of control. No, speak from the diaphragm, projecting power and infusing your own magic into it so that it compelled attention. Most never learned the trick, but powerful mages who went into politics soon did. Professional politicians like Fudge and Croaker lacked the power to use it casually, but Dumbledore wielded it effortlessly to command any crowd he spoke in. The Bulstrodes had taught Millicent when she was a child, with the intention that if she ever grew into such power, she could wield it. Hermione had that power in spades. Inquisitor. Well, I should expect a failed and collapsing ministry to fall back on the very tool the Muggles used to hunt witches and wizards to suppress those witches and wizards who dare to think, speak, or act like a true witch or wizard. Like the Inquisition of the Muggle Church, you will of course fail, but hurt any number of innocents before you do, Hermione said, and every parent and child on the platform was listening. Proudfoot drew his wand. Open your trunk. Hermione crossed her arms behind her back, coincidentally placing her hand on her Walther PPK back holster, but far away from the wand on her belt. Hermione spoke clearly. Kiss my ass. You have neither right nor warrant. Proudfoot snarled, stupefy. And a red globe with enough power not simply to stun a teenager, but to blast them half the length of the platform and possibly shatter some bones on impact launched for her head. Crack! Hermione had spun and dropped into a classic left-handed competitive firing stance, her left arm extended in line with her shoulder advanced. A direct, unbroken line connected Hermione's left eye, the holographic red dot sight projected by runes above her Walther PPK, and the exploding hand and wand of Aura Proudfoot. The clink of an expended brass landing on the platform was heard before the scream of the aura, but Hermione's right hand was over, but not touching her wand. Headmaster Dumbledore, let alone his pet inquisitor, has no legal authority to cede my rights against search and seizure, nor defense of the person. You have fired upon me without warning and without threat. I have chosen to disarm you without the use of magic, so you cannot even ask to examine my wand. Do be aware, Aura Proudfoot, that bullet-proofing charms in your robbles only affect bullets that would have struck your robes. Hermione said. Aura Proudfoot screamed as he grasped the ruins of his right hand. The bones had exploded in the hand, the shock wave of the impact of a round traveling with the muzzle velocity, associated with antimaterial rifles, had broken bones back to the elbow, and fragments of the wand were driven deep into the flesh of the forearm. Her muzzle pointed skyward with bent elbow. Hermione eyed the converging auras with amusement. A forest of drawn wands from a half-dozen auras and about 50 parents made it clear that should one single spell be fired, a bloodbath would result. Augusta Longbottom's sonorous charm cut through the babble of noise. Auras stand down. The Longbottom matriarch's voice hammered the crowd into submission by its power. Aura Stavendish shook it off and pointed a wand at her. You don't have any authority to command us. We are here by the Inquisitor's authority, with the agreement of the Minister of Magic and Headmaster Dumbledore. Augusta Longbottom sneered at the young Aura as only a grand dam of the founding 12 families could sneer. She sneered so powerfully that the stuffed vulture on top of her hat leaned down to sneer at the middle-aged Aura as well. Young man, I am the chairwoman of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. You will find on this platform, as in Hogwarts, that it is I, not the headmaster, not the Minister of Magic, and not some jumped-up bureaucrat in a made-up position, that has the legal authority here. Now, should you decide to settle this with brute force, and not rule of law, I shall have my grandson and his friends stack your bodies in the corner with the other trash to be taken out by the Hogwarts elves, so as not to disturb the first years. Auguste Longbottom had not removed her sonorous charm, nor pointed her wand at the aura. Neville Longbottom's wand, however, was a blaze of golden light. A golden scythe had formed, more a pole arm than a hand weapon, and the hum of power coming off the blade argued that if he flicked his wand, Aura Stavendish would never live to discover what it was that cut his shield, defensive enchantments, body and soul. Stavendish noted that the strange, rune-marked children they had been ordered to search had all trained their wands on different auras, so the half-dozen standing auras, no matter what the adults did, would be cut down at the casting of the first spell. They were fourth-year students. They hadn't even written their owls yet. They should be trembling in their boots before trained auras. Stavendish swallowed. The spit felt like a fist as it went down his throat. These were the children that used the torture curse on Dementors on the train the year before, the ones who had summoned a patronus dragon 300 feet long that actually ate Dementors at the Quidditch disaster. They had killed Death Eaters in full regalia, standing against teams of the experienced Death Eaters Stavendish would run before facing. Hermione coughed to draw his attention. You have no legal right to search a Hogwarts student's belongings or person without a warrant issued by the DMLE head, and Amelia Bones is about 100 meters that way, pointing her wand at you, not me, so I am assuming you don't have one. This being the case, you have an injured aura who needs a potion, which I shall not be giving him, and an entire aura detail in need of instruction as to the basic laws of Wizarding Britain and the Hogwarts Treaty, which I suspect Director Bones will be seeing you receive in the very near future. Put your wand away, or you will be responsible for lethal spell fire on the platform that holds the children of every powerful political figure on every side of the Wizigamot, and the child of every witch and wizard who is capable of challenging you personally to a duel whose results will be both lethal and legal. Aura Stavendish called out shakily. Auras, stand down. It took him 2 attempts to holster his own wand. At that point, 2 of his team had descended on Aura Proudfoot to staunch the bleeding and administer healing, bone regrowth, and blood-replenishing potions. As no one had thought to include pain potions, the Aura was screaming so loudly they had to cast a sound-muffling charm to stop the children reacting to his screams. As the teens stowed their luggage in the compartment, Neville finally broke down and asked, "Bloody hell, Hermione, how did you know all that?" Neville asked. Hermione shrugged. "Hogwarts, a history. I sent you all copies. I really do think you should read them. The minister has chosen to interfere at Hogwarts, I guess because he knows his hold on the ministry is shaky, what with Sirius being freed, his false imprisonment being exposed, and all those Death Eaters he freed as innocent, getting themselves killed by us when they slaughtered everyone they could reach at his precious World Cup. I don't know why Dumbledore is allowing it. Allowing a ministerial inquisitor at Hogwarts is a severe blow to his authority as headmaster, and he somehow allowed it. Barty Crouch isn't in any position to demand it. He barely got elected, and he has no support. Harry slumped into his seat. Politics. Dumbledore is unhappy that I am not being a good boy who lived, and dancing on his strings like a good little puppet. He is the champion of light, so he can't exactly publicly bully me into doing what I am told or me, and all of you pay whatever price he can legally justify. So he decides to allow Crouch to put in his pet inquisitor, whoever Dolor's Umbridge is, and she can do all the bullying while Dumbledore looks on like the saint that he is, goes tut-tut, if only you threw yourself upon my infinite mercy and begged forgiveness, I could make all the bad things stop. Millicent gave a soft clap. Harry, that was almost Slytherin. I am so proud. Draco looked at him in alarm. That was actually pretty decent analysis. Harry shrugged. Sirius has been making me take lessons. I complained to Griphook, but Fangborn overheard, and she and Sirius have been exchanging owls, so I get double-teamed. She seems to think any goblin who needs that much instruction on politics is a shame to the clan, so she has not only permitted, but ordered Sirius to double down on my instruction." Draco shuddered. "When your mother decides your lack of education has shamed the family, bad things happened. It was a lot easier simply to learn. That is how Draco learned dance after all," Fred offered. "It's all George concluded geek to me." Millicent cuffed her minions on the back of the head before ruffling their hair. "I don't keep you around for your thinking," Millicent offered, frowned. "Well, not your academic or political thinking. Your sneaky and underhanded thinking is a thing of absolute beauty." "You hear that, Fred?" said Fred to George. "I heard George," said George to Fred. "She called us beautiful." The Weasley twins high-fived and grinned at a disbelieving compartment. Hermione frowned. "I don't like the title of Inquisitor. In human history, no Inquisition started for limited ends with limited authorized means has ever stayed inside its limited means or within the scope of its defined ends. It is a recipe for abuse unless the person in power is a pillar of self-discipline and morality." Millicent snorted. Dolores Umbridge was a very junior undersecretary in the Department of International Cooperation under Barty Crouch. Since Britain does not cooperate with filthy foreigners, that is about as important as the position of Dementor's Undersecretary of Tourism. Since Bertha Jorkins did all the actual work for the World Cup and Triwizard Tournament, then somehow got lost on holiday, Dolores was under a lot of fire from everyone involved in the disaster of the World Cup because she didn't know anything about the work she claimed credit for doing, and was under even more fire for the Triwizard Cup because, again, she had no information about what security arrangements were. When the World Cup went pear-shaped, and suddenly having the Triwizard Cup at Hogwarts became a security question, instead of being fired for incompetence or being grilled by the Wizargamot for actual answers for what failed in security at the World Cup, or how things were improved for the Triwizard Cup, she is suddenly Barty Crouch's girl on the ground at Hogwarts, the Inquisitor of Hogwarts. She has escaped the consequences of her own incompetence and been promoted as Barty Crouch's political whip to bring disobedient students into obedience with Barty Crouch's version of reality and ministerial doctrine. Do not expect reason, respect for law, or anything resembling morality from her. Everyone looked at Millicent and blinked. "I rule a most ancient and noble house. I have like 20 witches and wizards who do nothing but gather intelligence on politics surrounding my interests at Hogwarts." Draco coughed, then pulled out stacks of handouts. "Mother drew these up for the rest of you. She figured that Sirius was sloppy, and the rest of you were too Hufflepuff to really prepare for political backstabbing, or too Ravenclaw to point it out to everyone she thought already knew." Luna looked briefly alarmed, as if she only now realized other people didn't know, and she should have mentioned it. Draco patted her hand and handed her a sheaf of papers she scanned and nodded over, as if confirming it contained all the major points. Neville sighed, Harry sighed, and Hermione looked alarmed. There had been something she should have studied and had missed. Millicent patted her hand. Only a Hufflepuff would be alarmed there was work she had missed the chance to do. Harry groaned. "You know this Umbridge is going to go spare when we co-opt her big moment to upstage her. Dumbledore is going to lose it. The fact he is going to have to pretend to like it is going to take years off his life." Neville eyed Draco and Millicent. "You know, this is going to tell us if Snape is still loyal to Voldemort. When he sees the locket, he's either going to react like the head of House Slytherin at the return of its most sacred founder's artifact, or like a Death Eater to the knowledge that one of his beloved Dark Lord has had part of his soul eaten and one of his anchors to immortality cut." Draco met his eyes. "I am confident of my godfather's loyalty." Harry shrugged. "A lot of people are. All but one of them will turn out to be wrong." Millicent Bulstrode. Lady Selwyn laughed softly. "Nothing like a Slytherin revenge drama, 10,000 betrayals leading to an ultimate expression of loyalty. I used to read them before bedtime and cry myself to sleep if I guessed wrong." Hermione looked at her with interest. "Did you guess wrong very often?" Millicent smiled. "Almost never." Hogwarts' Great Hall. After the sorting ceremony, Dumbledore sat smiling. Minerva McGonagall at his right hand was frowning, and Dolores Umbridge to his left was beaming. a vision of a pink toad-like woman dressed in what would have been appropriate female attire from a muggle version of Stepford Barbie. She was a vision of pink overcorrection for a lack of any feminine virtues. That is, she was clearly female, but had missed utterly any of the elements of human that generally attend either gender, and instead settled on toad with a side of eye-searing pink. Rufus Scrimgeour was perched beside Severus Snape, as the new Dada instructor had been a Slytherin in his day and felt better in company with his own. Professor Flitwick was looking puzzled, and you could see his wand had come out as he began to make passes in the air, testing the shift in the ambient magic that soon had him and Professor babbling of ancient runes and Seinstra of arithmancy in a three-way discussion over what each of them was detecting. Rita Skeeter of the Daily Prophet ignored, and was ignored by Percival Dippet, head political reporter, while their two photographers chatted amiably, ignoring both their over-wily personalitied reporters to talk shop in the way of professional technicians working for overly moody artists. There was a big announcement promised, and they were aware that the Minister of Magic's personal aura detail was in Hogwarts, which argued so was the minister. Dumbledore rose and tapped his glass with his wand. Welcome, students. Welcome to another wonderful year at Hogwarts. There are a few start-of-term announcements. First of all, I would like to welcome our new Dada instructor, Professor Rufus Scrimgeour, who comes to us after retiring from the Aura Department of the DMLE, where he had served as Chief Aura under the former Minister of Magic. Rufus rose, bowed, and spoke briefly. I have spent a few days with Professor Remus Lupin, who taught you last year, and been given a thorough grounding on where you all were, and what still needed to be covered. As he had gotten you almost back to where you needed to be, I will be taking it from there. Unfortunately, the Newt and Owl students will have a pretty hard time this year, as from what Professor Lupin has told me, you began last year almost a full year behind where you should be, and ended it not quite all the way caught up. As any of my auras can tell you, I am not the hardest taskmaster you could ask for, but I did train under him. Rufus' grin caused all of the auras in the corners of the room to shudder as they all remembered their own instruction under Mad Eye Moody. Rufus sat, having set the tone he wished for his year as an instructor. Strict, but having grounded the students on the very real and inflexible needs of their owl and newt requirements that they were expected to meet, and where they stood in relevance to that. Dumbledore winced at Rufus, openly admitting Dumbledore's revolving door of Dada instructors had a very real cost to his students, and that Quirrell had been absolutely useless before turning out to be a murdering inferi possessed by the Dark Lord. Deciding to sweep that political gaffe under the table as Scrimgeour being recently an aura rather than any sort of a more sensitive ministerial employee, he moved on. In the recent past, there has been a certain amount of conflict between the ministry and Hogwarts, or its students, about the proper use of magic, and specifically magical force. Since a number of students in Hogwarts come to our blessed halls without the grounding of a solid magical and moral upbringing inside our rich and ancient culture, his eyes move to lock visibly on Hermione, or who come from particularly disadvantaged subcultures, his eyes locked on Harry. Hogwarts has decided to waive its traditional immunity to ministerial oversight and allow the appointment of an inquisitor for moral and magical purity here at Hogwarts. I hope you will join me in welcoming Senior Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge. To say that her welcome was lackluster was putting it mildly. The Slytherins had started to look smug when they did the political translation of mudblood and half-blood for outside our rich and ancient culture, and goblin for disadvantaged subculture. But when the phrase moral and magical purity was uttered, their instincts screamed at them. For who in Slytherin House dared to examine their own chosen tool kits for moral or magical purity, when the only standard acceptable for Slytherins had always been success, not cleanliness or legality? Hufflepuffs had noticed Dumbledore's targeting of Hermione, and by extension all their Muggle-born, and Harry as the only goblin and done as Hufflepuffs had always done, locking tight around their own like a bronze-aged phalanx, pointing all wands or spears outward at the foe almost without thinking. Ravenclaws had looked upon the headmasters choosing to subject the students of Hogwarts to an inquisition of clearly political agenda from a minister whose time in office was measured in hours, not years, with all the horror that it deserved. The House of Wisdom knew of no foolishness for transitory or terrible than wizarding politics, and to hear that politics should now dictate their access to magical knowledge had the House of Eagles ruffling its feathers angrily. Gryffindors felt betrayed. Dumbledore had been their head of house before McGonagall, and yet here he was clearly allowing the Ministry to target Muggle-borns inside Hogwarts. They were generally the most clueless house when it came to politics, but they had seen the Ministry targeting all the Muggle-born and half-bloods for searches and harassment that it took Hermione Granger to point out were illegal, and worst, it had taken Hufflepuff, not a Gryffindor, to stand up to it. For the House of Lions, the champions of the oppressed, to find their own headmaster had invited the literal Inquisition into Hogwarts was not going over well. Percy Weasley looked like the only lion who was not already looking to mutiny. Dolores Umbridge had risen to give her own speech. Hem hem, she began, using the sonorous charm on herself to drown out all the growing muttering about her appointment. I come to you from Minister of Magic Bartimus Crouch Sr.'s own staff for the glorious and important task of raising your conduct to the standards that your forebears held, and brought glory to this ancient and revered institution. The general decay and decline of traditional discipline has had its effect, and no one more than the minister realizes that you are not to blame. You have been taught no better. Rejoice, for the minister has chosen to see to your moral correction before your graduation, so that you will be prepared before you leave Hogwarts to take your proper place inside wizarding society, to add to the harmony of a wizarding world that has recently been unnecessarily agitated by a minority of troublemakers. She stopped and smiled. It is more important than ever that Hogwarts puts its best foot forward, for Wizarding Britain is once again taking its rightful place in the forefront of the wizarding world, and the eyes of the world will indeed be on Hogwarts this year. Umbridge smiled and took her seat with a smile that any Goblin or Slytherin knew was a declaration of intent to subjugate, rather than one of peace or welcome. The angry mutterings again rose around the room, save from the Slytherins who were too savvy to show their true thoughts before authority. Dumbledore rose beaming, as if the speech had been a rousing success, and once again used sonorous to overpower the rising of angry mutterings. Quite right, quite right. The last announcement is that Quidditch will be cancelled for this year. Dumbledore held up his hands to quiet the roar of objection. Now. I already had Poppy regrow my eardrums from telling Professor McGonagall I don't need to lose them again. Now I understand that the Quidditch Cup is the most important thing here at Hogwarts for anyone not in their Owl and Newt year, and for a few who are, but this year that competition must stand aside for something far more exciting, far more important. An event is coming to Hogwarts that has not been seen in a century, and an opportunity is coming to a lucky Hogwarts student that will allow them to write their own ticket in the wizarding world after graduation, far beyond any Newt or mastery Hogwarts itself could grant. To explain, I shall turn this announcement over to the man who has spent years working with ministries from Britain and all over wizarding Europe, the man behind bringing the Quidditch World Cup back to Britain, and our new Minister for Magic, Bartimus Crouch Sr. Seamus Finnegan was heard loudly complaining. Is he trying to claim the Irish victory for England now? Or is he trying to say that the whole almost murdered by rampaging Death Eaters was some sort of huge organizational accomplishment? Minister Crouch visibly flinched and stopped to scowl at the Gryffindor table, who mostly scowled back, already upset about Muggle-born persecution, the loss of Quidditch, and the growing awareness that an inquisition about moral purity may have serious repercussions on dating broom closet activity in the coming year. Politics they may be weak on, but snogging in broom closets was something the Gryffindors took very seriously. Minister Crouch took Dumbledore's place at the podium and cast his own sonorous. He attempted to push his power out to back his words with magical force, but Hogwarts' wards flared, the runes burning visibly, and the minister winced as his magic was forced back into him. Snarling slightly, he began his speech anyway. For the first time in over a century, Hogwarts will host the Triwizard Tournament. For centuries, this competition would be held to settle primacy between the three great schools of Hogwarts, Durmstrang and Beauxbatons. The champion of the Triwizard Tournament will win 1,000 galleons tax-free, as well as everlasting glory. No few Triwizard champions have gone on to become ministers of magic themselves, as they have proven to be the foremost witch or wizard in all of Europe. Neville Longbottom forgot to whisper, "Yeah, the ones who lived." They quit running the tournament when it stopped being just all the competitors and started killing some of the delegates. I mean, the 7 times all the champions died were fine, but in Paris, when it took not just the champions but the headmasters and one of the ministers, they finally stopped it. "Silence!" roared Dumbledore, interrupting the minister and Neville. 20 points from Hufflepuff. Dumbledore said sternly, but Pomona Sprout alternated glaring at the headmaster and smiling at Neville, showing that Hufflepuff House was not punishing him. Minister Crouch forced a smile. "This year, you must all be on your best behavior, for Hogwarts will play host to the world. Beauxbatons of France and the Mediterranean and Durmstrang of Northern Europe will be sending their own contingents of students and champions, along with their headmistress and headmaster here to Hogwarts for the year. There will be 3 challenges spanning the whole school year, the final to require the use of the Quidditch pitch. Between these, there will be scholastic competitions, dueling competitions, broom racing competitions for Hogwarts students and those of the other schools to showcase their abilities and test each other. And of course the Yule Ball, with dances led by the 3 champions and their dates, which will be the focus of Wizarding Society for all of Wizarding Europe this year. This time Crouch had the students, and excitement was already building in most of them. Crouch posed for photos, but Rita Skeeter just looked at Harry and raised an eyebrow. This was hardly news worthy of her efforts. Harry Potter rose from his seat. Neville Longbottom and Hermione Granger rose with him. The 4 walked to the space before the main dais, and Harry began to hiss in Parseltongue. Hogwarts wards flared, and his words echoed back in his own voice from the stone, each sentence in Parseltongue booming back in English from the stones of the hall. "Hear me, Salazar Slytherin, first of the Hogwarts founders. Hear me, sons and daughters of his house. Hear me, House Master of Slytherin, for a son and daughter of your house would restore to Hogwarts one of its founding treasures." Stone snakes slithered down the walls of the great hall and rose to stand above the head table. Severus Snape rose and strode to stand in the shadow of the snakes, before the head table, eyeing Harry Potter with suspicion. Noodle the Serpent slithered down the aisle. Behind him marched Millicent Bulstrode and Draco Malfoy, each holding one end of a heavy silver chain, from which hung a green and silver locket marked with silver serpents. All light in the hall seemed to gather around the locket, and Noodle hissed in Parseltongue, "Behold the locket of Salazar Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts 4. The stones of Hogwarts boomed out the translation, and Severus Snape took a step back, shouting out, "How is this possible?" Severus Snape shouted. Rita Skeeter was on her feet, and the photographer was flashing photos as fast as he could reload. Millicent Bulstrode took a stance, taking the chain from Draco to hold it above her head. She didn't need a sonorous charm herself, as Draco swiftly cast a sound amplification charm for her. Stolen and defiled by Voldemort, this locket was recovered at the cost of the life of one of Slytherin's own, for it was the House of Black who recovered and cleansed it of its taint. Severus Snape snarled and shouted, his control shattered by the sight of his Dark Lord's former Horcrux, now cleaned of its taint by magic. Severus could not even contemplate, followed by the implication that his hated rival Sirius Black was somehow Slytherin. "Sirius Black is no Slytherin." Severus Snape shouted, and Rita Skeeter's eyes blazed as she saw the story blaze. Oh, there was scandal, drama, magic, intrigue, and possibly a few bodies to be found here. This was her story. Oh, the boy continued to impress her. This couldn't possibly be left to that political hack. This was a Skeeter story if ever one lived. Millicent, having already gamed this out with Draco 100 times, already had Snape's probable responses rehearsed, and a script worked out with both Sirius and Narcissa for maximum impact. Not Sirius Black. This locket was stolen by Voldemort, a holy relic of Slytherin himself, and the Dark Lord Voldemort defiled it, turning it into a Horcrux like Herpo the Foul, desecrating the magic of the founder Salazar Slytherin, with unholy murder and soul-violating magic, to kill an innocent for the power to bind a portion of Voldemort's own soul to this locket. Regulus Arcturus Black, although a marked Death Eater, understood that this showed Voldemort's promised future was a lie, that Voldemort himself was nothing but the basest and most vile corrupter and destroyer of Slytherin's name and legacy. At the cost of his own life, Regulus Arcturus Black recovered that locket from Voldemort's most hidden and defended sanctum and returned it to House Black. Millicent stated, "Impossible." Roared Dumbledore, who knew there was no magic that could remove a Horcrux from a person or object without destroying it. That is why Harry had to die facing Voldemort in the end. Yet here Harry's friends were not only announcing to the world the secret of the Horcrux, but claiming to have cleansed a second one off a second Founder's relic. Draco stepped forward and cast Sonorous on himself. Lord Sirius Orion Black, unwilling to let the sacrifice of his beloved brother be in vain, led a ritual in the ancient tradition, the tradition of the great houses before the founding of Hogwarts, or the ministry, in the ancient magic of the families, using members of every house of Hogwarts, of every blood status, and cleansed this holy artifact. It is the will of House Black that the House of Slytherin stands strong and equal to House Hufflepuff, to whom its relic has been likewise cleansed and restored. As Draco spoke, Millicent lowered the locket of Slytherin over House Master Snape's neck. As it did, the stone serpents above the dais lowered their heads to bow to Severus Snape, House Master of Slytherin. Minister Crouch lurched upright. That is a dark artifact, and must be turned over to the ministry immediately. It is rightly the property of the unspeakables, and will be given into my custody immediately. Stone serpents of above the dais turned to hiss at the Minister of Magic. Stone badgers rose from the flagstones between them to growl their defiance. Pomona Sprout rose and took the Hufflepuff cup in her hands and strode to stand beside Severus Snape. She bowed to him and he to her. They faced the head table and minister. In unison they spoke. Hogwarts stands together. Slytherin and Hufflepuff houses cheered, swiftly joined by Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Umbridge and Crouch shouted and snarled. McGonagall and Flitwick both stood and clapped, the latter standing upon the table to clap. Dumbledore met Snape's eyes like an angry guard staring down at his own Lucifer. Severus Snape rose up to his full height and glared back at Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He who had betrayed and defied the Dark Lord, now betrayed and defied the champion of light. Fear twisted inside him like a serpent, but the hand of Pomona Sprout closed on his shoulder. A peasant's hand, still with dirt beneath the nails. A farmer's hand he had sneered, yet she was the master of herbs as he the master of potions. Two magics changed the least in all the centuries of the rule of the ministry in Wizigamot. The old magics, the old ways. Severus Snape smiled. He turned to Professor Sprout and smiled, for once, without irony or agenda. Two of the Hogwarts Four had been restored, cleansed of Voldemort's taint, but not given to Dumbledore's rule. Freed by ancient magics, magics the ministry denied and forbade, magics the Dark Lord disdained and ignored. Feeling the weight of Salazar Slytherin's locket on his shoulders, he could feel its magic reaching out to the very stones of this castle. If Hegla Hufflepuff had been given charge of the welfare of Hogwarts students, Salazar Slytherin had been given charge of the destruction of its foes. He felt connections forming, felt his own magic tasted, tested, and accepted. Dumbledore looked down from the dais like the guard of the Muggle Bible looking down in judgment on Lucifer, the first rebel. Snape suddenly remembered Lily's explanation of Lucifer and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Lucifer, the morning star, the serpent of Eden. Dumbledore looked down like the wrath of the God of Abraham, and the head of the House of Serpents looked up at him and smiled. Rita Skeeter glanced at her photographer, who snapped the picture. Story, story, story. Rita knew it was just beginning. She would have to get a room in Hogsmeade. No way she was leaving Hogwarts alone for a single moment this year. Careers would be made this year, mostly hers, and careers would be destroyed. Oh, how many of them. Rita felt a lust no man, woman, gold, or even power could stir in her well up. Oh, 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 how the mighty will tremble and fall before this year was over. Rita would record it all, and maybe give a little push when they teetered on the brink. After years of being ignored, sidelined, and shut out because she wasn't born pure blood, wasn't related to anyone important or particularly rich. Now she would watch the whole comfortable wizarding elite fall and climb their wreckage to success. She could kiss every one of those dangerous little children. 49. Chapter 49, Reactions and Consequences. Crouch Manor, this hovel is the best my sworn can offer me, their dark lord. Voldemort hissed, his homunculus body like that of a prematurely aged child. Lucius No Name looked dishevelled, his carefully coiffure now bedraggled blonde locks held back with a twist of leather like some common ruffian, his face unshaved, his clothes serviceable but no longer elegant. His face was drawn, and his eyes shadowed, as he carried his dark lord with a subservience and fear the childlike figure should not merit, until you looked into those burning red eyes. Barty Crouch Jr.'s eyes were wild, his grin manic, and a nervous twitch caused him to lick his lips far too frequently, a leftover from his stint in Azkaban before his father switched his dying mother for him and smuggled him out to hold in the Crouch Manor under an imperious curse. My father's house may not be much, but since he is under my imperious now, it is the most secure in all of England. After all, you now have the Minister of Magic's own protective detail to defend you. Barty Crouch's laughter was clearly insane, but his point was valid. When he had attended the Quidditch World Cup under an invisibility cloak, he had used the confusion of the event to steal Ludo Bagman's wand. With his father running for Minister of Magic, and with the frustrations of having to broker deals with Dumbledore and Lord Parkinson both, Barty Crouch Sr. had been driven to drink. With the loss of his willpower and the growing resistance of repeated use of the Imperious, Barty Crouch Jr. had finally broken free of his father's curse and used the stolen wand to place his father under the same curse. Now Voldemort had smuggled himself back into England and gone to ground in the Minister of Magic's own manor, with the Minister under his Death Eater son's control and the Minister's protective detail defending them from any intrusion. The irony made Voldemort join in the laughter. The Jorkins woman was milked of all the information we needed for the World Cup security and the Tri-Wizard tournament. Why am I hearing reports of my followers being slaughtered like sheep by a handful of children? Did I not train you myself? Did I select squibs, mudbloods, weaklings? You were to have spread fear and confusion the length of the land, driven the ministry to spread its auras thinly, forced them to reactionary legislation and controls to build resentment and make recruitment of minorities like the werewolves easier. Instead, everyone is talking about Harry Potter and his little friends. Where are my reports? Summon the team leaders. I want to hear what went wrong. Voldemort hissed and tapped his wand to Lucius Darkmark. Instantly, two figures appeared, Lords Parkinson and Nut. Voldemort waited for several seconds, then snarled. Where is Rosier, Rockwood, McNair, Dolohov? Where are my elites? He turned to Parkinson and Nut. Where, worms, are your leaders, my picked men? Lord Parkinson worked his hands like he was washing them, the sweat on his brow betraying his fear. They are dead, my lord. They ran into more serious opposition. Voldemort's childlike body could not contain his rage. Antonin Dolohov was the European dueling champion. He has faced Albus Dumbledore and walked away, battled James Potter and Sirius Black together and still escaped. He killed the Prewitt twins and burned their house down over their corpses. How did he die in a simple raid? Not snarled. Sirius Black killed him. He's different since Harry Potter had him broken out of Azkaban. Stronger, more focused. He had easily twice the power as last time Dolohov fought him. It wasn't even close. Voldemort shrieked, his voice more like a demon than a man. What were my Death Eaters doing while Dolohov was fighting alone? I ordered 60 of you to the raid. What were they doing? Buying souvenirs from the stalls. This was a raid. Parkinson whispered harshly. They were dying, Lord. Harry Potter and his brats were ambushing them all through the grounds. They didn't stand and fight. They ambushed our men, cut them down from behind, confused them in the fog, and made them shoot each other. And the ones who got lured into the forest got crucified. Voldemort slumped down, his rage no longer able to push the fragile shell of a body he rode. The Jorkins woman was nearly dead before we used her to birth this body. I haven't enough power to lead you in battle like this. We need to complete the ritual to get my body back. Without me, you pathetic fools clearly cannot even discipline school children. Voldemort hissed. When I have my body back, I will break my truest disciples from Azkaban. Without Rockwood, I will need Bellatrix, Rabastran, and Rudolphus Lestrange. I need my commanders if I am to turn the rabble of this generation into an army to take over Britain." He watched everyone flinch and turned his gaze to Lord Parkinson. His red eyes burned into the Death Eater, and his legitimacy tore from his follower all the things that they had feared to tell him. Voldemort's voice sounded hollow and shocked. "Dead. Bellatrix, my right hand. They killed her in Azkaban before I could even come for her. They dared. No, not they. Not the Ministry, not the gutless Auras. Potter. Potter dared to free his Sirius Black and kill all three of my Lestrange. I was always going to kill him, use his blood for my return, but now I must kill him threefold." Voldemort sighed heavily. "They found the cup and the locket. Regulus Black betrayed me, chose his family over his lord. All my defenses, all my wards, magic's no living mage could hope to equal wards, potions, curses, inferi potions, and all defeated by one angry little boy, bitter because I poisoned his precious house elf." Voldemort turned, and his wand flashed, catching Lucius with a blood-red beam. "Crucio!" As Lucius screamed, Voldemort snarled. "If you had not used my diary and bungled it, Narcissa would not have divorced you, denying me control of the Wizigamot, denying me the money to bribe the weak and foolish to their own destruction, and my enemies would not have known my Horcrux even exist. They have found and destroyed 3. They must know 3 is a powerful magical number, and a greater number of Horcrux than any have ever dared. They cannot suspect that I dared to make 7, or that the Potter boy is the last." Voldemort sighed. "Still, they know about the Horcrux, and they never should have. That means I cannot wait, cannot rebuild my forces slowly. Ravenclaw's diadem is in Hogwarts. I will need to take that to be sure it is safe. No one can pass the defenses on my ring. No one knows about my snake Nagini. I am going to have to use shock and awe, take the Ministry by storm before that old fool Dumbledore trips on his beard and falls on the diadem, or Harry Potter finds it at the bottom of his cereal bowl like a muggle prize." Barty Crouch knelt by his dark lord and stared into the blood-red eyes of his master. "I can deliver Potter to you, my lord, and the Ministry." My father had already used his access to doctor the Goblet of Fire, so Harry Potter gets selected as champion, and he had reset the code from Dumbledore's kinder, gentler tournament to the settings that killed the last set of champions. I can manipulate it so Harry Potter's prize at any point can deliver him to you for the ritual. I can take him in the first prize before anyone even knows it is a trap." Voldemort sneered. "Before, that would have been wisdom. Before, all I needed was Harry Potter's blood to make me whole and strip away that bitch's protection. It isn't enough now. The Death Eaters cannot inspire fear when Harry Potter's little children have slaughtered them at every turn. I need my coming to shake Wizarding Britain to its core. They must see my first act and tremble. It isn't enough for me to kill Harry Potter. I need those pathetic sheep to understand who Harry Potter is, that he is the only thing that has kept me from conquering them for the last decade, that he is their true and only hope. They must know and accept him as their champion, so when I slaughter him before their very eyes, they will see all hope die." Turning to Barty, he spoke softly. "Harry Potter must be tested, must be pushed to the very limit. He must prove to the world that he is no ordinary wizard, that he is their prophesied savior. Only then, when I kill him, can I regain the fear your pathetic brethren squandered by dying to kindergarten children playing with crayons." Voldemort smiled. "We will hit the Ministry next, before they can move to war footing, before those fools even believe I am back." Barty Crouch Jr. knelt and kissed Voldemort's childlike hand. "I have my father under the Imperius. I can order him to drop the wards, and even order his auras to surrender when you come. You can take the Ministry with barely a spell fired. When they go to sleep, dreaming of the boy who lived falling to your wand, they will wake up to find you already took the world." Voldemort knew it would not be that easy. Many would fight. Without leadership, and with their trusted defenses betraying them, they would fight as individuals, never sure who among their own troops were secret traitors. It would not be bloodless, but it would be far closer to a massacre than a battle. Still, he would not have time to get his Dementor allies from Azkaban, nor free his remaining trapped followers until after the Ministry falls. He had only a handful of werewolves, not the dozens of packs he was planning on gathering, and he had only begun to gather the vampires. Harry Potter had cost him time. Voldemort must strike boldly, in the open, not slowly and methodically building strength from the shadows, and cutting the Ministry and its allies in 1,000 pinprick raids, until they were spread thin and bled, almost dry, before finally pressing for decisive battle. Harry Potter had forced Voldemort to strike too soon, to risk it all on one turn of the die. It was a shame he could only kill the boy once. Still, he had friends. He supposed killing them would at least take some of the edge off his frustration. His remaining Horcrux must be safe. Curse the boy. It wasn't enough he cost Voldemort his body in 1981. Now he forced Voldemort to strike too soon, with too few allies, and too little control of the powerful houses of the Wizengamot. Secrecy must be sacrificed, secrecy and security. Once he had his body and magic back, Voldemort would teach this new generation why they dared not even speak his name. Dumbledore's office Griphook, Sirius Black, Augusta Longbottom, and Narcissa Black sat in seats behind Harry, Neville, Millicent, Hermione, Draco, and Noodle. Severus Snape and Pomona Sprout flanked Dumbledore's desk with Minerva McGonagall and standing behind Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster's mask of grandfatherly concern was in danger of slipping as the magic leaking off him caused the wards of the headmaster's office to spark and flare as his personal wards, and the magic of Hogwarts began to clash in unaccustomed opposition. Harry, I fear you are needlessly endangering yourself and your fellow students by acting openly. You have revealed to Voldemort that you know his greatest secret. Now he will be forced to move against you here at Hogwarts. You have threatened the plans of those far older and wiser, those who have faced Voldemort before and learned his methods. Dumbledore's voice was low and powerful. The subsonics woven into it would have been imperceptible to anyone who was not currently wearing Noodle draped over Hermione and Harry both. The compulsions were subtle and not overtly demanding, not commanding instant obedience, just that his words be heard, internalized, and deeply considered. Noodle poked Harry in the side of the head, then hissed at Hermione. The lying one is doing it again. Since he can't get into your minds, he is weaving his magic into his voice. Center yourself. Find the magic that is not your own and drive it out. Noodle hissed before glaring at the headmaster. Most of the room was nodding, unconsciously giving the headmaster's words the weight he desired them to have. The Parselmouths in the room all snarled and took a moment to center themselves. As their eyes flared open, human and goblin, wizard and witch glared hotly at the headmaster. Griphook took it upon himself to speak, sliding his dagger from its sheath and resting it on the headmaster's desk, point facing Dumbledore. You have just used voice magic to influence the mind of everyone in this room. All of you who find yourself suddenly agreeing with the headmaster should cast whatever detection and protection charms you have to find and isolate his influence, or you will find yourself freely giving away your will, your choice, and your rights to this thing. Griphook said, contempt dripping from his voice, and his knife digging deeply into the headmaster's desk, as if daring him to object. Foe, the phoenix on his perch gave an angry squawk and flew from the room in a flare of fire, expressing his disapproval of Albus' actions by leaving his side and the castle during the discussion. Minerva McGonagall, who had been nodding, cast the charms reluctantly, only after noticing Pomona Sprout and Severus Snape both casting theirs and turning, wands in their hands to face the headmaster. And she cast her own, purely to dismiss the ridiculous notion that Albus Dumbledore would use magic to affect the minds and wills of faculty, students, and parents. She was shocked to see her detection spells found a suggestion active and working against her will. A quick and almost overpowered banishing of compulsions saw more than one effect torn from her, and her thoughts about more than a few conversations in which the headmaster had talked her around suddenly struck her as deeply suspect. Albus Dumbledore, how could you? McGonagall shrieked, shock and horror at her mental violation, robbing her of her legendary self-control. I am going to have to see to the wards of the Board of Governors' chambers. How many times have you used this, Albus? We knew about your legilimency, and most of us have oculomancy to protect ourselves, but we never dreamed you would stoop to casting wandless and chantless charms of influence on us. This will have to be addressed. Augusta Longbottom said, the old lady sounding tired and almost defeated as the faith she had so long held in the champion of light and the righteousness of his cause died its last and final death. Dumbledore slammed his hand down on the table. Do none of you understand? You have all but demanded Voldemort's immediate attack. Sirius laughed and gripped Harry's shoulder, nodding to him. Harry turned to Griphook, who bared his teeth in a smile no goblin could mistake. Harry took a deep breath and faced his headmaster and would-be puppet master. Of course we did. Every one of his pet Death Eaters has seen their dark mark growing. Every one of them is beginning to make plans of their own to sabotage whatever resistance the Ministry can give. We stopped one attack at the World Cup because it was dead bloody obvious they would need to hit it. But while we sit here in class writing lines for hurting your feelings, the Death Eaters are free to recruit and train entire legions. They are blackmailing and threatening officials to get access to all the information and influence they need. They're getting busy with laying the groundwork for winning the war again, and you are sitting in your office like the world's skinniest acromantula, spinning webs and puppeting school children while Voldemort gets on with winning the war. Dumbledore rose to peer down at Harry. The Order of the Phoenix is moving. Harry held out his hands. Yeah. Guarding some prophesy you won't tell me about that supposedly explains why Voldemort needs to kill me first. Well, I already know that bit. You will only lie about the rest, and you know what? I don't care. You have had since my father died to buy my mother time to make her own death actually matter to act without Voldemort's interference. In that time, you have neither found nor destroyed a single Horcrux, which you already knew about. I am in my 4th year of school, and I have found and destroyed half of them. Oh yes, I know he tried to make 7. You have had my entire life to act when Voldemort wasn't even able to lift a wand, and you have done nothing but try to mess with my life. You haven't killed a single Death Eater, you haven't destroyed a single Horcrux, you haven't even raised an army to defend Britain. You have sat in your office and told the world that I am the boy who lived, and that you will guide me to some predestined victory where I guess I am supposed to hug the greatest mass murderer since Grindwald, and we just explode in a magical backlash of suppressed feelings. Harry mimed gagging, throwing up and wiping his face. He then raised his hands. Or just throwing it out there, we could cut off his access to political power. See Lady Selwyn, Lady Longbottom and Lord Black behind me. Cut off his access to the funds needed to bribe his way into influence over officials. See Griphook and Lady Black, also behind me. We could start stacking piles of his Death Eater senior leadership as corpses in public, so that his new followers see that the price of marking themselves with the Dark Mark is a sudden and violent death. See the World Cup. We could show that his great terror weapon that no witch or wizard dare to face can not only be beaten, but can be killed. See our last year's train ride, and the dragon of Hogwarts raining dead Dementors all over the Quidditch pitch in front of most of the students and half the parents of Hogwarts. We're not waiting for Voldemort to decide he is ready to strike. When he is sure he has subverted, co-opted, or destroyed every defense we have, and can just stroll in and take power. We are taking the war to him and forcing him to act before he is ready. We are winning the war, not waiting for it. Harry's voice was strong, clear, challenging, but absolutely controlled rather than emotional. He eyed Dumbledore, who opened his mouth to say something else when a hammering was heard on his door. Headmaster, headmaster. I know there is a meeting going on about the unconscionable disruption of the minister's presentation, and as the duly appointed Inquisitor of Hogwarts, I demand to be present. Griphook laughed, as evilly as only a goblin could laugh. Go ahead, headmaster. You have chosen to let the dragon into your castle. Now you have no choice, but invite it to sit at every table, lest you offend it. Griphook's laugh was savage, as Dumbledore's wand flicked to open the door to very angry Dolores Umbridge, whose face was as darkly pink as her dress, and whose rant went on for 20 minutes, alternately insulting, threatening, and demanding answers. Harry and Party smiled sweetly and laughed in her face. Harry cast his eyes over to Severus Snape, whose mask of Slytherin disinterest cracked slightly to reveal disgust at Umbridge and her total lack of control, as much as her seeming inability to see how suicidally stupid forcing denial of reality as public policy would be. As the wizarding world stumbled, and staggered, unprepared, into the second round of Voldemort's aborted blood war. Harry saw Snape flinch as his dark mark flared, and watched how the Slytherin housemaster stroked Slytherin's locket, and drew the strength from it to rise above the pain of his mark, and the ranting of a barely functional witch, whose only power was to toady to those with authority. Harry raised an eyebrow and let a small smirk twist his lips, and saw the dark flash of humor and ghost of a smile play across the potion's master lips as well. The ridiculousness of the little pink puffer-toad daring to berate a room full of witches and wizards, the least of whom could snuff her like a candle, was too funny to fully pretend to take seriously. Griphook crossed his legs and laughed openly as Umbridge lost what little self-control she had to rage against subhumans being allowed above ground, and to dare to actually speak to a wizard beyond, taking orders and begging forgiveness for the crime of being born subhuman. Hermione turned to Millicent and whispered, "If she says that to Professor Flitwick, 10 galleons that the blood spatter covers at least 5 meters of hallway." Millicent turned to Hermione and shook her hand. "You are on." "I think he will use fire and render her down into the kind of grease stain you get when you have a lard fire. No more than half a meter of slippery soot-marked floor. 50 points from Hufflepuff and Slytherin for disrespecting the Inquisitor," Umbridge squeaked, fumbling in her purse for her wand. Pomona Sprout's wand was already out. 50 points to Slytherin for defending another head of house from defamation. Phileas Flitwick's goblin heritage is a point of pride for him, and his inclusion among our heads of house is a point of pride for us. Severus Snape flicked his wand casually, and he drawled, almost lazily, 50 points to Hufflepuff. The House of Slytherin does not tolerate racism against our magical brethren. I am pleased to see Hufflepuff maintains similar standards of behavior. It was a testament to Slytherin's self-control that none of the Slytherins in the room reacted to the claim that Slytherin had ever accepted the other magical races of Britain as anything but servants. It was perhaps the greatest show of house unity ever, that no one in the room laughed as Severus gave the point award while claiming Slytherin's claim to historically rejecting racism. Dolores Umbridge sputtered herself into silence, unable to even decide who to target next in her rant. Dumbledore, recognizing that there was no possible advantage to continuing this confrontation masquerading badly as a conversation, offered quietly, "I think that covers all we need to discuss at this point, and I am sure that our students, parents, and faculty all have many important start-of-term things to be about." Dumbledore waited until he was alone in his office to pull his wand and blow apart several very expensive and irreplaceable magical apparatus, and scream his rage so loudly that his personal wards flared so brightly the whole tower containing his office burned gold in the growing darkness of a Hogwarts dusk. Somehow, the headmaster thought, somehow I will get the boy to understand that he needs me. Only I know the truth of the prophecy, and the true path to Voldemort's final end. Harry's as well, but it wouldn't do to burden the boy with that knowledge. It was enough that Dumbledore knew. In the end, he was the only one who knew what was required, and he would do what it took to see Harry Potter played his part right to the end. Classroom outside the Ravenclaw Tower. Luna sat with her teapot, 2 young house elves too young to serve, and the ghost of the Silver Lady. Luna poured a full cup of tea for herself, a half cup of tea for each house elf, then turned to pour out the rest of the tea on the floor. Taking the now empty teapot, she made a pouring gesture over the remaining teacup, and silver ghostly tea fell from the pot to fill the Silver Lady's cup. "They have locked you out of the tower again, my eagles," the Ravenclaw ghost lamented. Luna cocked her head. "They cast a muffling charm on the riddle speaker, so I cannot hear the riddle. If I was meant to get in, then I would simply guess the answer anyway, but I could not, so that meant I am to spend the night having a tea party." "They are bullying you," the Silver Lady said quietly. "Children can be cruel, people can be cruel, magic can be cruel." Luna shrugged and sipped her tea. "It doesn't pay to dwell on it." She smiled sadly. "I could get angry, I could tell someone, or I could have tea with my friends." Luna was instantly pressed between 2 very tiny house elf children who were hugging as hard as their tiny arms could hug. She felt warm and happy as the Silver Lady looked sad. "It's so easy for you. Your friends would never hurt you," the Silver Lady said softly, Luna smiled sadly. You are wrong. My friends often hurt me. They hurt me because they can't see what I see. They hurt me because they think I can't tell when they are humoring me, that I can't tell when they ignore me because what I am telling them simply can't be true. The Silver Lady hissed. Why do you allow it? They are less than you. They cannot see what you see. They deny what you know, even when you share it with them. Luna laughed. Because I love them and they love me. They aren't very good at showing it, but I am worse. They want to keep me safe from the things that they see that I have taught myself not to see. I want to keep them safe from the things that I see that they have taught themselves not to see. The Sliver Lady wept silently. Friendship isn't real. I had a friend once. I shared with him my greatest shame, and he swore he would help me fix it. He swore he would help me return my mother's diadem that I stole from her because I grew so tired of living in her shadow, and just once wanted her to see me, not the woman she needed me to be that I would never become. Instead, he tricked me and turned it into something wicked. Now I can't even die to face my mother again. Luna's met her eyes and let her own tears fall. My friends are real, and they will make it right. Not yet. There are too many unreal things that have to happen yet. The Silver Lady looked up, alarmed. Unreal things? She asked, placing her ghostly teacup down. Luna shuddered. That is the problem between untrue things and unreal things. My friends ignore me because I see things that are unreal, but unreal and untrue are two different things. They have brought something into Hogwarts, something unreal, and the unreal is straining at the seams, stretching reality and looking for the weak points. They are going to awaken it here, inside Hogwarts. They are going to bring the unreal into life inside the greatest concentration of magic in all of Wizarding Britain, and I don't know if I can keep all my friends safe. Luna said softly, her eyes filled with tears she swore firmly she would not shed. The Sliver Lady looked at Luna in alarm. What are you going to do? Luna blinked and refilled the Silver Lady's cup with the ghost of tea before picking up her own cup of real tea and sipping carefully. I am going to have tea parties, Luna stated firmly, her plan for the unreal and its uncertainty forming in her mind in the natural way her mind had for accepting the uncanny. She matched eyes with the two house elf children who took up their teacups firmly and with a fierce nod joined her in taking a sip. Tea parties were serious business. Chapter 50, Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore was in fine form at the morning feast. Today was Saturday, and a day that should have been given to sleeping in if you were a sensible person, madly revising your many and varied classes if you were Hermione, or burning through the air amidst a storm of bludgers with nothing but raw speed and instinct between you and death by enchanted cannonball if you were any of the beta mad companions. This Saturday, everyone was in the great hall in formal robes and seated at their house tables because today marked the official start of the Triwizards tournament. Minister for Magic Crouch and his auras were somewhere in the castle, not being sniped at by Dolores Umbridge for the crime of putting their elbows on the table or chatting with a neighbor, instead of freezing in place for hours without a single risk of spilled food, while 2 schools' worth of champions somehow, probably not Floo or Portkey if they had to assemble outside, made their way to Hogwarts. The students, being students, proceeded to feast and feast harder and chat louder when Dolores Umbridge began shrilling at the students that anyone who spilled food would get detention, which Ron Weasley attempted to protest, blowing about half a pound of scrambled eggs, a toast crust, and part of a sausage over Seamus Finnegan, who had drawn the short straw to sit across from him. This caused Fred and George to begin a Scourgify fight, as within moments all the Gryffindor table had taken cover, such as they could find, and began to shoot at each other with overpowered cleansing charms. Slytherin looked on with horror, Ravenclaw with interest, and Hufflepuff just kept chewing through their own breakfast in the sure and certain knowledge that there was no point in Scourgifying until the meal was actually finished. Dumbledore was holding court at the head table with his staff and several members of the press, including Rita Skeeter, who was only allowed into Hogwarts due to Augusta Longbottom and the Hogwarts Board of Directors, overruling both Dumbledore and Minister Crouch about banning her from the castle for life, the next 1,000 years, or whichever was longer. Dumbledore rose from his seat, and fluffing his beard to its full splendor, used his magic to echo his words from the very stones of the castle. Students, staff, and honored guests, I will ask that you join me in front of the castle by the Black Lake entrance, where we will assemble by houses to greet our honored guests. When they have been given a proper Hogwarts welcome, Minister Crouch will bring in the goblet of fire, and we shall begin the glorious Triwizard Tournament officially. Dumbledore's speech did fire the students, and a raucous round of cheering was heard answering back his call. With all the precision and discipline of four gaggles of geese attempting to exit a single barn door at the same time, the Hogwarts students displayed the same happy disarray that they gave to the school song, managing to cluster together into four amorphous blobs in house colors, bearing as much resemblance to Inquisitor Umbridge's commands of neat military lines as treacle tart does to high-fiber, low-fat diet. Dumbledore looked pleased at the happy Hogwartian chaos, even as Snape quietly intimidated his Slytherins into something resembling a square. His efforts were frustrated when Millicent Bulstrode shouted across to Harry in a most un-Slytherin fashion. "Harry, I feel them. They are coming up through Black Lake. They must have followed the deep Chanel from the sea," Millicent shouted. Professor Snape and Inquisitor Umbridge both shouted independently for Millicent to be silent, which the sturdy Slytherin beater chose to rise above and ignore. Harry pointed to the sky. "Millie, I feel them. Coming through the air, something huge is pushing through the air like a dragon." Inquisitor Umbridge lost what shreds of control she had and shot a powerful stunner at Harry that he casually flicked at Millicent, who casually flicked it back. They batted the stunner back and forth like a little red bludger until the poor harassed Hex simply exploded in a small shower of angsty sparks, while the Inquisitor gaped like a carp on land at being utterly ignored by everyone. Half the students were following Harry's arm, and it was Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff seeker, who saw them first. "I see them. Pegasi or hippogriffs pulling a carriage," Cedric shouted, and the students began to cheer. The winged horses and carriage grew larger, even though far away, and larger until Hagrid finally cried out, "Blimey, those aren't Pegasi, those are Abraxan horses. Each of them are the size of an elephant. That carriage has to be the size of one of the Hogwarts towers." Hagrid roared in amazement. Umbridge was shocked into silence as the scope of the carriage became known. Circling once overhead, the wind from its passage knocked many of the smaller students over, and the thunder of the Abraxan horses' hooves striking the ground could be felt through the students' very bones. The carriage was decorated in the Baroque style common to Louis Roman XIV France. Lots of gold cherubs and mythological creatures were worked into the carriage, every surface of which seemed to be carved artistically to the point its functionality could be missed. Those whose senses were reasonably sharp could feel the deeply layered wards built into the carriage, arguing that whatever else this carriage was, it could indeed serve as a fortress redoubt for the Beauxbaton students. It was Draco Malfoy, the Slytherin seeker, who spotted the top of the mast breaking the surface of Black Lake. "Ship ho! Rising from the lake!" Draco cried. And indeed, a ship was rising from the lake, less like a Muggle submarine and more like a broaching whale. The ship was to every eye the very model of a 100-Year War-era frigate, only it rose from the deep with neither sails nor oars driving it, the many masts bare as it rose from the deeps, and the unformed students serving as sailors, apparently untouched by the icy lake water of the Scottish Loch. Rufus Scrimgeour palmed his wand and muttered to Dumbledore softly, "I know you count him as a friend, but I was there when he was arrested. Headmaster Karkaroff was a Death Eater. If those gun ports open, I am going to start blasting, and I suggest you do too," Scrimgeour said, wand at the low ready, eyes on the ship's side for any sign she was cleared for action. Dumbledore shook his head and frowned. "Igor Karkaroff has my full confidence. He regretted taking the Dark Mark and cooperated with Auras in hunting down and prosecuting his fellow Death Eaters." Scrimgeour chuckled. "He was running pretty hard when we caught him." Both his regrets and his cooperation were born when he was in irons, stripped of wand and chances to run. You will forgive me if I trust him less than those he betrayed into Azkaban. The students of Hogwarts were alternating between cheering and waving to the incoming students. A friendly if chaotic greeting the Durmstrang students greeted with a frown and glower from the sides of their ship, where they stood unmoving in ranks like so many Marines about to deploy. They were greeted with a resigned sniff of disapproval by the neat columns of Beauxbaton students in their royal blue robes, who followed the absolutely massive Amazonian figure of their headmistress Maxime as they exited the carriage like a parade column. The Hogwarts students were chased back into the great hall to await the official introduction of the two schools' headmaster, headmistress, and candidate champions. This time the hall rang with happy, babbling voices, excitement owing nothing to the headmaster's machinations and everything to do with the exciting and very definitely foreign guests. Dumbledore rose and once again cast sonorous to carry his words above the babble. I would like you all to put your hands together to welcome the gentle witches and wizards of our cousins across the channel, the glorious students of Beauxbaton's Academy. Walking with the grace of dancers and the arrogance of princes, Madame Maxime lead the students of Beauxbatons, the royal blue of their robes and soft caps. Leading the students was a witch of almost matchless beauty and commanding presence. Every few steps the students would bow, and with the sweep of their wand, flowers, butterflies, fairies, and other glamours would flow outward in a wave, until the hanging candles of the great hall were rivaled for glory by the soaring and singing creations of the Beauxbatons witches and wizards. While many of the students were taken by the inhuman charm radiating from the lead witch from Beauxbaton, those with an eye for magic noted the ease with which the leading witches and wizards of the Beauxbaton Academy had cast layered charms that covered the great hall ceiling and showed no signs of fading. Quiet murmuring began from the Ravenclaw table as the enchanters of the House of Eagles recognized the skill and power displayed so casually and artistically by the Beauxbaton's Academy, so frequently dismissed in the British press as being frivolous and flighty. Dumbledore exchanged kisses with Madame Maxime, who towered over the headmaster like the headmaster towered above Flitwick. Hagrid seemed lost in his adoration of the giant-sized witch, missing his seat altogether in his first attempt to sit down. Dumbledore turned his head back to the opening of the main hall and raised his voice again. Now put your hands together for the proud sons and daughters of the North, the witches and wizards of Durmstrang. Durmstrang had the reputation of being a dark wizard school, largely since Grindelwald had not only been from Durmstrang, but had used it as a base late in his war. The school itself prided itself on a Spartan military discipline, and its focus on all militant magics, including many that had been banned in Britain since before Grindelwald, let alone Voldemort's rise, leaving British wizards to view Durmstrang graduates as little better than magical thugs. Brown uniforms resembling Napoleonic War Prussian infantry uniforms with fur caps and half-capes with high dragon-hide boots. The wizards and witches of Durmstrang entered in two columns leaving a hollow center, with the stomp of jackboots, each right boot heel hitting the floor in time with their heavy wooden battle staves, each strike causing the floor to flare with a blast of flame, the runes on the staves flaring bright. Headmaster Igor Karkaroff, looking like a half-starved, half-mad wolf wearing stolen human clothes, stalked down the middle aisle while a lone boy with broad shoulders and a close-cropped buzzcut stalked between the two columns of students, a black cloud rising around his feet to half-cloak him in darkness, which was split by jagged lightning that lit his features into stark relief each time his battle stave hit the floor. Walking inside a black storm cloud that seemed to hide the floor itself, the boy's features were lit by the lightning, as if the boy himself was the oncoming storm. Recognition flared around the room, beginning in whispered and leading to a chant. Crumb, 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 crumb. Victor Crumb had come to Hogwarts. When the Beauxbaton students settled at the Ravenclaw table, and the Durmstrang students had settled at the Slytherin table, Minister Crouch and his minions descended on the Great Hall, a large chest floating between four auras to take its pride of place on the platform before the main table. As the chest was placed on the dais, Albus Dumbledore sank to one knee and whispered to the stones of the Great Hall. Around the chest, two rings of runes, one Norse Futhok, one Druidic Argum, slowly counter-rotating in layered warding of the treasure about to be unveiled. Minister Crouch smiled from the podium, almost mechanically. He spoke with none of the animation of his previous visit, his words chopped out like he had to pay for each separately and begrudged everyone. Those who listened assumed he was so busy being Minister of Magic that looking after the Triwizard Tournament was something that he begrudged having to spend time on, yet his eyes blazed like a fanatic, however he seemed to speak. Welcome, students of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, to the first Triwizard Tournament since 1792. For over 400 years, the three schools would send their best and brightest to test themselves, and the teachings of their institutes to build a greater respect and awareness of our separate traditions, and of course, settle the question of which among the schools produces the greatest witch or wizard of our generation. The traditional prize of the tournament, then as now, is 1,000 galleons and eternal glory. Due to the dangerous and demanding nature of the challenges, no witch or wizard below the age of 17 will be allowed to enter their name. Any witch or wizard who wishes to compete for the honor of their school and the glory of their name can put their name into the Goblet of Fire. Be warned, the Goblet of Fire is an ancient magical artifact used prior to the 13th century to settle wars and inheritance disputes. Placing your name in the goblet constitutes a binding magical contract. Once you have entered your name, if you are chosen, you must compete or you will lose your magic. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me present the Goblet of Fire. The sides of the chest fell away, and a large cup, more of a cauldron, stood. It was unremarkable, seemingly ordinary, made of rough bronze with decorations on it of Celtic knotwork that drew the eye and seemed to catch those who looked too long upon it. Dumbledore gave his wand a wave, and the Goblet of Fire spouted blue flames like those that burned above the barrows of the dead on Samhain night, when the veil was thinnest and the hollow hills sometimes opened. While the students and staff were absorbed in the glory of the goblet, one student stepped from the Ravenclaw table. Luna Lovegood's eyes were wide and terrified. Her magic flared about her, arcs of magic crackled and shot from her, her eyes blazing with light that shone forth bright enough to draw cries of shock from those who looked upon her, yet it was her voice that shook the room. Lear Fale brought from Failures which shouted under the kings of Ireland, sword in the hand of the nimble lug from Guarias, a choice of vast riches. From Fianias far over the sea was brought the deadly spear of Nuedha. From Uirias, a huge mighty treasure, cauldron of the Dagter of noble deeds. You fool, you arrogant, ignorant fool. You have brought the cauldron of noble deeds inside the wards. You have brought the cauldron of Dagda among your children, and bound their souls to it. The Tuatha De Danann, the Sidhe, the ancient elves who turned sideways from the world when they could not stand against the cold iron of our blades, left this for a reason, as a punishment, as a trap, and you have bound your children to it. Luna fell to her knees before the goblet and wept. Seamus Finnegan shot from his seat and shouted before Crouch or Umbridge could stop him. Dagda, the cauldron of Sarding Dagda, and you brought it inside the wards. What kind of daft English idiot thought that up? It's not bad enough you stole the bloody thing from the Irish. You didn't bloody listen about how dangerous it is. Seamus was shouting. Minerva McGonagall shot to her feet and shouted at her student. Mr. Finnegan, that is enough. For once, Seamus Finnegan was not cowed by his formidable head of house. Enough, enough, I'll tell you about enough. The Tuatha De Danann did not go gentle into that good night. They were driven from this land by Muggle iron and wizard magic, but they did not go quietly. They went into the Hollow Hills, leaving the sum of their weapons, their treasures behind, each cursed and blessed to drive us to murder each other to possess them. We leave offerings for them, but always outside, never inside. We call them the good neighbors because we are terrified to name them because they just might hear us. We don't draw their eye, we don't speak their name, and never, bloody sarding, never do we let them in the house. Seamus came back to himself shaking. I will be owling my parents. I am withdrawing from Hogwarts. Unnoticed, at the Hufflepuff table, Harry Potter had his teeth bared and his goblin's silver knife in his hand. His green eyes blazed the color of the killing curse, and the blue light of the goblet's fire caught upon the Swalo rune of his scar, blazing like a challenge at his race's ancient foe. The Goblet of Fire was lit, and the Triwizard Tournament had begun. You fool, you arrogant, ignorant fool. You have brought the cauldron of noble deeds inside the wards. You have brought the cauldron of Dagda among your children, and bound their souls to it. The Tuatha De Danann, the She, the ancient elves who turned sideways from the world when they could not stand against the cold iron of our blades, left this for a reason, as a punishment, as a trap, and you have bound your children to it. Luna fell to her knees before the goblet and wept. Seamus Finnegan shot from his seat and shouted before Crouch or Umbridge could stop him. Dagda, the cauldron of Sarding Dagda, and you brought it inside the wards. What kind of daft English idiot thought that up? It's not bad enough you stole the bloody thing from the Irish. You didn't bloody listen about how dangerous it is. Seamus was shouting. Minerva McGonagall shot to her feet and shouted at her student. Mr. Finnegan, that is enough. For once, Seamus Finnegan was not cowed by his formidable head of house. Enough, enough. I'll tell you about enough. The Tuatha De Danann did not go gentle into that good night. They were driven from this land by Muggle iron and wizard magic, but they did not go quietly. They went into the Hollow Hills, leaving some of their weapons, their treasures behind, each cursed and blessed to drive us to murder each other to possess them. We leave offerings for them, but always outside, never inside. We call them the good neighbors because we are terrified to name them because they just might hear us. We don't draw their eye, we don't speak their name, and never, bloody sarding, never do we let them in the house. Seamus came back to himself shaking. I will be owling my parents. I am withdrawing from Hogwarts. Unnoticed, at the Hufflepuff table, Harry Potter had his teeth bared and his goblin's silver knife in his hand. His green eyes blazed the color of the killing curse, and the blue light of the goblet's fire caught upon the Suelo rune of his scar, blazing like a challenge at his race's ancient foe. The goblet of fire was lit, and the Triwizard Tournament had begun. 51. Chapter 51, Champions. Twilight, just before dawn after the igniting of the goblet. Albus Wulfric Percival Brian Dumbledore felt rage and power. Never had he felt so much power flowing through him. The power didn't make him feel young, for even in his younger days when he and Gellert Grindelwald talked of reshaping the world to their greater good, when they dreamed of together becoming the new Merlin, did he have so much power flowing through him. The elder wand in his hand, the Deathly Hallows answering to his will alone, marking him the greatest living wizard, Albus strode to the goblet and drew upon his connection to Hogwarts, the web of ley lines that connected to the stones of the castle, feeding the magic of all the lands of Britain into this one sacred place where the founders had gathered the magical children of the Isles for safety. He drew upon the wards woven by the Master of Serpents, the Lady of Eagles, the Lord of Lions, and the Lady of the good growing earth, and he went forth to do battle. Expel Imunda! Dumbledore roared, his call to banish the unclean answered by the magics of Hogwarts, the magics of the whole of the lands of Britain, and by the light itself as called upon by its champion. The phoenix that was his companion gave voice in a wild trill of righteous flame, and threw itself at the too pale blue corpse flame of the goblet of fire, the cauldron of Dagda. An explosion of black feathers resolved into a black-haired, pale-skinned woman, her body lean and hard. 2 short swords of bronze hung at her hips, but it was a wand topped with a crow skull, with 3 crow feathers hanging from it that she waved to banish the Lord of Light's spell, as if it were nothing. Impossible, shouted Dumbledore, drawing on his power over Hogwarts as its headmaster, drawing upon the ancient ties to all those who had served before him, binding the spirits of the past headmasters to his own will as he became fully the magic of Hogwarts, and cast a curse no one living would have believed would come from his wand. Avada Kedavra, Dumbledore spoke, and all of Hogwarts rang like a bell as the Morrigan opened her arms and drank down the killing curse as if were blood spilled upon her altar. Dumbledore fell to one knee, crying out as the stones at his feet seemed to suck his magical power from him, not in a trickle, not in a flood, but in a raging river that left him gasping and barely able to breathe. 2 more figures, almost twins to the Morrigan, formed from the cloud of crow feathers and bound Dumbledore's arms. Barnaby Matcher, force the old fool to bow before me. He has been a poor host and requires instruction. Too late did Dumbledore realize who he faced. Morrigan, the 3-part goddess, or the senior of 3-sighter goddesses of war and magic of the Tuatha De Danann. The Morrigan, wife to the Dagda whose cauldron burned before him. You cannot do this to me. I am the master of Hogwarts. I am the strongest mage since Merlin. Dumbledore protested, and Morrigan stepped forward. Her bare foot bore nails that were not black as a crow's wing, but the near black of dried blood, and he feared that is what had painted them. She pressed his face into the ground. Merlin, what pale imitation wizard is that? He is no Amagin who were the sons of Mill and their cursed iron to these shores. Amagin would have been wise enough to know that you who have brought the cauldron of Dagda inside your walls, and lit it as your hearthfire in your own hall, have invited us as your guests. Your magic is bound by the laws of hospitality to defend your guests until and unless they raise wand or blade against you as I have not done. She ground his face into the stones of the hall. Great Mother Dana, Mother Magic, I the Morrigan, Queen of Witches, call upon you for judgment. The lord of this place has with unrighteous hand struck with killing power upon a guest he has invited into his halls, has struck upon the victim of his own theft before the very object he has stolen. Mother Magic, I call for judgment. Dumbledore shook. The laws of hospitality bound all the ferry, and they bound the pure-blooded houses of the ancient blood of Britain, as they bound the pure-blooded houses of the north, of all the land of Celt and Norse, Greek and Roman, Persian and Pashtun, Hindu and Hun, Arab and African. He and Grindelwald had planned to sweep away the vestiges of such ancient and tribal magics from their brave new world, to leave no power of magic subject to any law save the will of the wizard and the might of the strongest. Yet he had drawn into himself the magics of Hogwarts, of the founders, of the wild magic of Britain that flowed like the blood of magic itself through the bones of the world to the beating heart of power at Hogwarts. The ancient and wild magic had dangled before him like ripe and poisoned fruit, and he had drawn it into his sacred self, drank from that bottomless well of power until drunk from it, then violated its most ancient laws to strike down a guest who stood defenseless before him. The elder wand itself burned in his hand, causing his own blood to sear in his veins as the ancient magic of the Hallows judged Dumbledore and found him wanting. Magic is never free, and Dumbledore had drawn upon ancient and sacred covenants for power to break those very same ancient pacts, and the power of magic looked into the headmaster, the champion of light, and passed their judgment. Dumbledore screamed as magic sank its claws into him like a phoenix of fire. His own phoenix burst into flame and fell dying to be reborn, as Dumbledore too burned but was not allowed to die. He had broken the laws of hospitality and drawn upon the sacred magics of Hogwarts as its master to do so. In its rage at Dumbledore's double betrayal to invite the fairy magic inside its wards and place all of its children at risk, it bound Dumbledore to the stones of the castle itself. As Dumbledore had invited in as guest, and then attacked his invited guest, he had robbed Hogwarts of the ability to strike against the fairy invaders, robbed Hogwarts of the chance to use its own magic to defend against the Tuatha Dedanan, and the darkest of its queens, the Blood Queen Morrigan. So too would Hogwarts bar Dumbledore from wielding his magic in any place but Hogwarts or for any cause than its service. The headmaster rose from the floor to stand before the inhumanly cold and bitterly beautiful goddesses, the Battle Crows, Morrigan, Bartleby, and Matcher. He felt the power he had gathered, and in mockery it came to him. Never had he been so powerful before, and the bitterness of the truth struck him. He was more potent now than when he faced Gellert all those years ago, more potent than when he stood off Voldemort, yet powerless to leave Hogwarts, or to cast so much as a lumos were it not in service of the school and its needs. Fairy gifts, like swords, always have two edges. For his crime, he had been made little more than a slave to the school he had thought always to use for his own purposes. For his crime, he held more power than any witch or wizard who strode the earth, but could not so much as raise his wand against those fairies he had in his ignorance and arrogance first invited in, then struck. Filled with power almost beyond reason, he watched powerless as the Morrigan and her sisters turned into crows and flew deeper into Hogwarts to work the will of the wild magic, bringing the power of fairy and the twilight lands below the hollow hills into a school full of children he had denied the knowledge to know their own peril. Breakfast in the great hall was chaotic, for the great hall hung thick with ivy on the walls, and great trees and bushes bearing fruit rose up. Apples, blueberries, blackcurrants, loganberries hung from branch and vine, and strange wild house elves clad not in dish rags and towels, but wild growing leaves. Their eyes bright, their teeth sharp and joyous or mocking laughter fell from their lips in turn. The Beaubaton and Durmstrang students sat at the rough-hewn round tables on the rush-strewn floor and looked upon the wild magic splendor of the hall and gave voice to the supremacy of the Hogwarts magic. For neither the cold, forbidding fortress of Durmstrang nor the bright splendor and craftsmanship of Beaubaton could compare to the wild magic of Hogwarts' ancient hall. The Hogwarts students were divided between wonder, all of Gryffindor, half of Slytherin who have a weakness for the forbidden, half of Ravenclaw who have a similar weakness for the forbidden, and half of Hufflepuff who felt the connection to magic, to the earth, the sea, the sky. The dancing flame burned so much brighter that magic seemed to dance under their skin and beg them to follow the tune. The other half of Slytherin understood temptation, was predation, and felt for the first time like small, tasty forest creatures alone in a forest grown strange and hungry. The other half of Ravenclaw had studied all the ancient tales, the tales of every human people of the world of the before time, of the races that held these lands before man, and of the long and bloody struggle before those two pale lords turned sideways from the sun and earth to vanish into the hollow hills, neither fully gone nor fully forgot. The other half of Hufflepuff saw the gifts and drew back, for Hufflepuffs knew to take no thing unearned. There was only reciprocity in magic. If you did not agree on a price before making the magic, you could not argue with what coin it chose to take in payment when it was done. Harry was a goblin. Sure, his skin and bones were human, but his blood was goblin, and his blood boiled. When the sons of Mill came, the Milesians who brought cold iron in mortal hands, and the wizard Amogin, so that the numberless humans could bring final death to the long-lived but slow-breeding Tuatha De Danann, those the Irish and Scot remembered as elves had turned from their lands and went sideways from the world, taking only their chosen servants with them, not the goblins. The goblins were unseelie, the ugly and unsightly foot soldiers who had stood in their proud ranks and slaughtered the Furbolg to take the islands for the Dedanan, and who had fought against the calming humans until their lords decided it was not worth their precious blood, and left their unwanted servants behind. The goblins had been driven from the face of the world, forced into dank caves and mines they could hold with their wards, and with their traps, so even the ever-breeding humans gave up finishing the last of them. They left the leprechaun, who now were little more than slaves to the Irish ministry. They left the Spriggans, who, cut off from the wild magic of the she-holy places, had been forced into literal slavery, as house elves to the conquering humans, and they had left the Vila and Selkie, who at least with one form that was pleasingly female, had one coin to pay the new conquerors that would at least let some of them live. To say those they left behind did not remember the betrayal of the Tuatha De Danann was putting it mildly. The goblins did not forget. The goblins did not break faith. The goblins had fought and died in every battle, for every sun, bright lord and moon-touched lady, for each of the 4 holy cities and their lords, until the day those lords turned sideways from the world and let the goblins face the wrath of humanity alone. If there were 1,000,000 goblins in the world, Harry would eat Gringotts. Mankind numbered in the billions, but there were but a few 100,000 goblins left. The wrath of man was eternal, its memory may be short, but its hatred and prejudice was undying, and the goblins had faced it since the dawn of the Iron Age in an endless and slowly losing struggle since the day their bright and perfect lords had deserted them. Harry hated. He hated as only a goblin could. He had owled his father and mother immediately. He found Seamus Finnegan, Cormac MacLaggart, Siobhan O'Connell, and Dara MacCrimmond also owling their parents. Those children of ancient Scot or Irish blood, like the goblins, knew what had been brought within the walls, and knew Hogwarts could not be made safe while the Triwizard Tournament raged, and the cauldron of Dagda burned as the sacred hearth of Hogwarts itself. Hermione had disappeared into the library because she did not understand and could not allow that to stand. Millicent and Draco had followed because they did understand and knew they were not nearly armed enough. Neville disappeared into the greenhouses and farmlands because he needed to feel the earth beneath his feet and in his bones to truly think. The Ravenclaw girls saw the Luna Lovegood they had larked from the tower walk into the great hall for breakfast in a long flowing gown of blue and bronze, clasped with chains of gold, with fine sandals of gold and dragonhide on her foot, and wrapping gently up her legs with leather worked in runes of power, and bound with bells of silver that sang with each step. She had been locked from her tower, and her shoes had been stolen, yet she walked into breakfast dressed as a queen, with flowers woven into her hair, in a gown worked with jewels and gold worked in strange and ancient patterns. She smiled dreamily and took breakfast in the changed great hall as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sylvia Tremont, fifth-year Ravenclaw and a leading student of ancient runes, leaned over to Luna and hissed at her in alarm, noting the Celtic runework in her gown and on her sandals was beyond her own ability to craft, if not understand. "Luna, where did you get those?" Sylvia hissed urgently. Luna kicked up her feet, examining the workmanship. "A tea party. Tea parties are very important." Sylvia hissed again, jealously giving way to alarm. "Luna, those are not human work." "Those are. I don't even think I understand everything they are, but the bits I know are too powerful to simply walk around in. Nobody gives power like that away." Luna looked at her Ravenclaw senior, and her eyes grew sad. "Hospitality is important. Not everyone understands that. Leprechauns and Spriggans, brownies and Huldra like tea parties too. No one offered them a place to sleep either, so we took tea together. Then I made them a bed with transfiguration. When I woke up, my clothes were like this, and I finally had shoes. Hospitality is the greatest magic of all, don't you think?" If Luna noticed the girls of the Ravenclaw dorms who routinely locked her out, stole or destroyed her goods, refused to meet her gaze, or even look up from the ground, she did not show it. A crow sitting above the Ravenclaw table did notice, and cawed thrice, its black eyes bright and cold as only a corpse-eater can be. The laughter and conversation of students, the song of knife, fork, and shouted, "Hey, that's the last one." That marked a standard breakfast, sounded in the hall before an explosion of feathers turned everyone's attention skyward. The normally open sky of the great hall was now thick with branch and bower, so the explosion of post owls became a storm of eerily silent feathers as they darted and wove between branches with their missives and cargo. More than one sword, axe, and dagger dropped from weary and overstrained owl singles and pairs, as alarmed parents sent hoarded treasures in to protect their cherished and clearly endangered heirs. More than one received howlers that shouted out the warnings about taking no gift without giving a matching one, testing every food, every object, every person they met with the touch of cold iron to dispel the magics of the troublesome lesser fairy, and to never, absolutely never, give anything that might be a challenge to one of the greater. Daily prophets rained from the sky like London during the height of the Blitz. Professor Flitwick alone had the sense to cast what amounted to a sine wave protego that darted over and under the table to put a dome over every cup and plate and leave the table between bare, so that the falling newspapers struck table, not breakfast. Slytherins and Hufflepuffs had been expecting and waiting for this, so very few casualties. The Gryffindors, being very much creatures of the moment, were distracted by the many competing howlers, the interesting and clearly dangerous weapons. So the second wave of daily profits caused damage equivalent to a level 3 all-Weasley food fight, according to the Percy Chaos Scale, adopted by Gryffindor for food-related carnage. The fact that the Prophet was a double issue probably didn't help. It was only the Quidditch team, defending the first years, that prevented Madame Pomfrey from suffering a post-breakfast rush of injured students. The Chaser girls fielded everything that was even vaguely within arm's reach, and the Weasley twins went bats out and redirected every falling prophet in danger of hitting a fragile Eichel Firsty to instead impact either Percy or Ron, the latter who kept eating during the attack, using one arm to deflect incoming papers in a way that argued he might actually make a decent keeper one day. The headlines were not tremendously flattering to either the school or ministry. "Putting the dumb in Dumbledore." "The headmaster invites the wicked fairies in to feast on your children," more on page 3. "Minister of Morons." Newly elected minister for magic Bartimus Crouch Sr. has entered into a wicked pact with an ancient fairy article to perform a blood sacrifice of your children. Details on the death toll of previous championships on page 3. Pictures of the slaughter of 1792. All champions, all headmasters, 3 judges, 6 audience members on pages 4-7. Fact and fiction about fairies, what Dumbledore stopped teaching since 1956. Pages 12-24. Educational alternatives for sane parents. Homeschool and transfer, how to make the ministry get your children an education without wicked fairy blood pacts. Page 25. Minister Crouch proclaims your children are safe. He guarantees it. See Bartimus Crouch Jr. convicted death, Ida sent to Azkaban. Bartimus Crouch Sr. swears he had no clue. Page 8, possibly unrelated, but financially quite sound. There was a full-page ad for family vacations to the Academy of Gandhishapur, Iran. The ancient seat of Sassanian learning had been maintained since the 6th century, weathering the Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, Mongols, and Turks before the statue of secrecy made it unplottable for Muggles. They offered full family vacations and tour of the University of the Old Persian Empire, not directly citing the problems at Hogwarts, but mentioning the ancient wards that blocked all magical beings other than witches or wizards, without even a single house elf permitted inside its sacred boundaries. Harry was willing to be whoever handled their owl post was going to be buried this week, with families needing to be out of Britain for a bit. Hermione had her fingers in her ears long before Dolores Umbridge cast her sonorous and shrieked. Honestly, not a combination anyone wanted to encounter. Her demands that all students were to hand over their copies of the Daily Prophet at once, or be whipped, were repeated twice before Poppy Pomfrey had enough, and cast such a beautiful stupefy, expelliarmus, and incarcerous combination, that her wand seemed to simply carve a single blazing rune in mid-air before the pink toad-like inquisitor was stunned, disarmed, and bound, before being gentle caught by a quiet but firmly worded levicorpus, to hover silent, bound, and stunned beside the faculty table. Was Professor Flitwick, Ravenclaw head, and noted dueling champion that stood upon his chair, and began the round of applause that eventually rocked the great hall, and had a blushing Mediwitch finally forced to stand and take a bow before the students who had previously, and clearly erroneously, thought the Mediwitch harmless rather than simply gentle. Morgana's tasty left nipple. Next time Madame Pomfrey tells me to take one of the nastier potions, I will think twice, maybe 3 times, before arguing. Neville swore softly, impressed at the Hufflepuff Mediwitch's wand prowess. Hermione frowned. You should never argue with Madame Pomfrey. She is at least as qualified as the healers at St. Mungo's and a lot more experienced. You can work decades at St. Mungo's without seeing half the injuries you get at Hogwarts in a good term. Harry nodded. Yeah, and I've never been here for a good term. Harry noted, drawing nods from the rest of the Hufflepuffs. Neville looked at the goblet of fire, the revealed cauldron of Dagda, the cauldron of brave deeds, also known as the cauldron of dead heroes, and shuddered. At least with the Daily Prophet article out, we won't have to worry about idiots putting their name in the damned thing. Hermione sighed. I tend to forget that I am the only one here. Neville, I hate to break this to you, but 1,000 galleons and unending glory is more than enough to make people put their name in. Harry looked shocked. What are you talking about? That isn't worth dying for. Hermione looked angry. Says Lord Potter, one father the lord of one of the greatest houses in the Wizengamot, the other a senior account manager at Gringotts, probably with more gold in his vault than half the families of the Wizengamot combined. Did you ever wonder why Tom Riddle left as head boy with a record number of owls and newts all at outstanding, and the best he could do was a job at a dodgy shop in Knockturn Alley? Did you ever wonder why Remus Lupin, who taught us as the best Dada professor we ever came to teach in robes that were so patched and thin he shivered half the year? Riddle was a half-blood. Lupin was a werewolf. Most of the people working in Knockturn Alley in jobs that range between immoral, illegal, and deadly are doing so because they lack the blood, status, and connections to get a decent job. Did you never wonder why Madame Rosmeter, with a mastery in potions, is working as the barmaid of the 3 broomsticks? She's half-blood, and if you don't get into the ministry, then menial work is the best you can do. She made it all the way up to being owner and sole employee of a pub that survives off Hogwarts Hogsmeade weekend trade, and that is with a mastery. Harry looked insulted. My mother was a muggle born and got a job as an enchantress. Neville grabbed his shoulder. Look, mate, your mother got a job at a Potter family business after marrying your dad, the sarding heir. It's not the wand in her hand that got her the job, but the wand stirring her cauldron. Hermione winced. Ignoring the blatant misogyny of that remark, it is the absolute truth. Wizard society, since the statue of secrecy, is closed. A small number of purebloods own all the businesses, own all the government, and make sure that only those of their own kind have a chance to rise to the top. That everlasting glory means that you won't just compete as the equal of the pure-blooded puppies for positions of actual power and wealth. You will be the one every business and government is competing to hire, just to say they have the most powerful witch or wizard in all of Europe. Of course people will die for it. Poverty doesn't make your life hard to risk at all. 3 figures in royal blue robes, escorted by Madame Maxime, stalked towards the goblet of fire. Each clutched a piece of paper in their hand. The boy who was first was muscled like a swordsman. He moved with the predatory grace of one who had fought well and often. He strode to the first line, and it blazed as it verified his age. He strode to the second, and it verified his core power. Smirking, he strode forward. The cauldron began to sing. 3 female voices sang in Gaelic as he pushed forward. Curfa, say mo leach mo Gilmere, say mo shisa, Gilmere, na if you are as fein and suan na sayin, o cute chugai gisain mo Gilmere. X2 bims buan ar buet gachlo, ag ka go cruer is ag tuor narendior ma skilid uim and buchil beo, is nariamta tuarisk uid mo bran. Curfanai heapin cuach bar suek ar niwin, taid fjorchen usel ar uatha spot. Taid sydd suet ar iam buet, sa embran o cute skilid, uin and buchil beo curfa is caswili acute la heang hisog. La lugade mac shane na embayman more. La cureai, ardmac deran wa, tishuk iron train ar toi. Curfala canol sirnek birnad poit. La firgas fientach fian mac roig la conchubha cade mac nais nanas. Tishuk epin creeper and choil. Curfar X2, the boy struggled as he tried to push forward. His muscle trembled, his brow sweat, and visions seemed to torment him. Finally he screamed in fright and broke to run from the hall, throwing his wand and name paper from them as if their touch burned him. Hermione looked at Neville, who was wincing. Neville, did you understand that song? Neville nodded. My gran used to sing me to sleep with it after we visited Mom and Dad. I had such a hard time dealing with their pain, with them always and forever being in pain just for the crime of daring to stand up to Voldemort. She would sing it to me and tell me that my parents were heroes, that I was supposed to grow up and be a hero like Maida. Neville began to sing softly in English. Chorus, my dashing darling is my hero, my dashing darling is my Caesar. I have had neither sleep nor good fortune. Since my dashing darling went far away X2, I am perpetually worried, every day wailing heavily and shedding tears, since my lively boy was released from me, and there is no word of him. Alas, chorus, the pleasure of the cheerful cuckoo at noon is gone, the affable nobility are not bothered with sport the learned, and the cultured are worried and sad, since the lively lad was taken from me. Chorus, he is like young Eanghus, like Lughade Mac Shayin of the great blows, like Ku Rai. Great son of Dare of the gold leader of Eia, strong in pursuit. Chorus, like Canol Sirnak, who breached defences, like worthy fair-haired Firgas Mac Roig, like Conchubha, venerable son of Nas of the tradition, the pleasant chieftain of the Fenian branch. Chorus, X2, since my dashing darling went far away, Harry snarled. The cauldron only wants heroes, the blood of heroes, the souls of champions. For 1,000 galleons and the promise of bloody glory, it wants to bind our best and brightest to the damned cauldron and the deadening. Hermione watched as the second French would-be champion faltered and turned away. The last one, the one whose beauty tore at the eyes and mind, whose blonde hair flowed as beautiful as any fairy, whose face could grace any statue of queen or goddess, alone strode forward. Who is that? Harry asked, feeling her beauty pull at him, but his own runes of rulership not allowing him to be swayed. Hermione spoke flatly. That is Fleur de Lacre. She is part Vila, so she is about as screwed in this society as Remus was. Her blood is magical on both sides, but you should know as a goblin, Harry, she isn't quite human enough to ever have a chance as anything other than trophy wife unless she wins this. The first line flared, and Fleur did not slow. The second line flared, and Fleur did not pause. The cauldron began to sing, and Fleur's flesh began to burn with fire. Fleur screamed, but it was not a human scream of fear, but an eagle's cry of defiance. Her face morphed into an eagle's beak. Her long, delicate legs became clawed like those of a harpy or griffin. Her arms became wings, and each feather dripped with fire. Fleur stepped forward, and red flame from her wings beat at the blue flame from the cup, until the latter broke, and again, a too pretty girl in blue robes stood with a piece of paper in her hand. She stepped forward like a dancer, and placed the scrap of paper in the blue flame without fear of its touch. Turning to the hall, she curtsied deeply, then strode to the side of Madame Maxime, who looked down her nose at the entire hall, as if daring any of them to equal her champion's feat. Morgana's teeth, I would not want to stand between her and what she wants. Hermione said, gripping the table fiercely, admiration shining in her eyes for a girl who had chosen to rip her worth from a wizarding world that thought to allow her only for her beauty. Harry shuddered. Too right. That look in her face reminds me of Mum. He thought for a second, shuddered again. Both of them. It was about half an hour later that Igor Karkaroff stalked forward, stopping at before the first line and gripping his left forearm as it began to smoke. Snarling, he stepped back as Victor Krum strode forward. His uniform was plain, unadorned brown, his face a thing that might have been hewn from the bare rock of Bulgaria. Cold blue eyes stared at the cup, his face showing no emotion whatsoever. Yet this was the Krum of the World Cup. His face flickered in the ghost of a snarl, and he stepped forward. The first line flared, and he made a brushing off motion as if it were an annoyance. The second line flared, and he slapped it down as if it were an obstacle. He was moving faster now as he hit the wave of blue fire that lashed out from the goblet to strike at him. He was no Vila with magic over charm and fire. He was nothing but a poor half-blood from a forgotten farm village in mountains of Bulgaria, so poor the government barely bothered to oppress them, no matter who conquered last. The goblet sang to him, the song of heroes, the song of love for the fallen brave, and Victor Krum pushed forward. He screamed as the fires lit him. The blue fire burned into his flesh, and the bones of his face shone through his skin as he fought forward with more than magic, with the will and rage of a dragon, with the blood of one who had nothing but his will to wield against a world, but for whom that will would be, must be enough. The fire broke before he did, and the cauldron of Dagda sang its love for heroes and the damned who died trying to be one, as Victor Krum placed his name in the goblet and turned to face the hall. His eyes were wet with the tears streaming down his face, but his mouth was a hard, uncompromising line of iron. None dared to meet his gaze as he strode from the hall. Merlin's bloody balls. Neville swore, then shuddered. Not me, mate. Not on a bet. Harry nodded. Not me either. If Griphook or Fangborn found out I bound my soul to the cauldron of Dagda, for 1,000 galleons I would be cleaning dragon shit out of the deep tunnels with my dessert fork for a month. There were a dozen students who tried to enter their names, and none of them succeeded. Most were Hogwarts, but not all. Millicent, Fred and George were arguing about rune homework when they saw Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff prefect, Quidditch captain, and if his father Amos Diggory had anything to say about it, future Minister for Magic strode forward. Bloody, began Fred. Hell, continued George. What is he, marveled Fred, doing? Finished Fred. Millicent looked as Cedric passed the first and second lines without effort. They're boys, goes a boy whose father has his whole life planned out for him. Not a single obstacle in his path, his future a path lined with flowers, and not a single chance he can be denied. Millicent said softly. Cedric pushed into the blue flame of the goblet, the song of heroes playing again, as the flame seemed to form claws that tore at the boy like a cat playing with a captive mouse. The boyish, blushing face of Hufflepuff's golden boy grew bloodied, as his nose fountained blood, as Cedric gave his all, every ounce of will and magic in his body, pushing his body beyond the limits of flesh alone to drive into the fire, his legs pumping like the third rank of a phalanx pushing the dead onto the spears, so he can reach the fight. Millicent listened to the song of the cauldron sing welcome as another brave or damned put his name in the fire and saw it blaze its acceptance. Millicent shook her head, her face made of cold Arctic ice and the pitiless open sea. That right there, boys, is a man who would rather die than live the life someone else made for him. I am very much afraid that he will. History of Magic class, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Millicent, and Draco almost piled up in the doorway to History of Magic, because it was not the ghostly Professor Binns who stood at the lectern. Instead, an old man in ancient druidic robes sat on a simple stool of wood, a large harp before him. The old man smiled and raised his head, his ears tapered to a fine point, and his skin was too pale to have ever seen the sun, but his eyes sparkled with wit, wisdom, and knowledge. Come, children, I am Quapper Mac Ettin, and among the bards am certainly not held the least. I have learned and lived the history of magic since before your ancestors learned to take up staff or wand, and for all that you have given me guest rights in your hall and feasts from your table, I have as yet given nothing in return. Bards are the keepers of history, and of knowledge, the instructors of children. If you allow me, I will this day sing for my supper and teach you much that has been forgotten. Millicent hissed out and grabbed Hermione. Hermione, please. I didn't bring any parchment. I never learn anything here. I only brought books to study. Wordlessly, the Queen of Revision and Note-taking opened up her pouch of spatial expansion and pulled out enough parchment to properly reskin all the cows in Scotland. There would, for once, be notes to take, and the true history of magic to learn. Tea party, too, again locked out of Ravenclaw Tower. Luna, I don't think you are taking this seriously enough. There are things stalking the halls that don't exist, things the wards didn't stop. Things out of fairy tales and nightmares. Draco insisted Luna set her places carefully. The Spriggans and Brownies gathered around, and on the heads of each were woven crowns of flowers Luna had set. I think it's lovely that other people can see them now. They were ever so lonely when it was only just me. But I do think tea parties are important, Draco. Tea parties are the most important things in the world. Draco Malfoy was raised to be lord of an ancient pure-blooded house, and his manners were driven into him on a level below reflex or instinct, to the point that he could no more think about not following them than he could simply decide his heart should stop beating. Draco pulled for the chair for Lady Ravenclaw and seated the Silver Lady, ghost of Ravenclaw, after he did the same for his own Luna Lovegood. Spriggans and Brownies danced and cavorted about, but Pale and two perfect ladies sat within human grace as he pulled their caress out for them. Draco Malfoy sat down to a tea party with Luna Lovegood, the ghost of Ravenclaw, and two of the Tuatha De Danann. Luna cut and served slices of pie, plating pie, scones, and tiny minced meat tarts for the guests. Luna babbled happily as she served the living and the dead, the real and the unreal. This is treacle tart. It is new since your time. The scones are not new, but the loganberries are probably new. The minced meat is just minced meat, but none of it used to be people, so that might make it different from what you are used to. Burbled Luna happily as she served. Without any notice, she took a plate served with each offering that she had put before Draco and the two Dedanan ladies, and cut her finger, dripping blood onto each, then tipping it into a burning brazier beside the table. Passing the plate through the smoke, she let her blood drip onto the plate, and ghosts of the food formed in silver light, which she placed before the Ravenclaw ghost, once the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw herself. Draco watched with something between wonder and horror as his girlfriend casually performed what amounted to food necromancy so that her boyfriend, elven guests, and dead guests could all share the same snack food. Mother hadn't prepared him for this, which was odd. Draco Malfoy was sure his mother had prepared him for every tea and dinner party possibility. He was quite shocked to find that his education, rather than being wastefully overcomplicated, had missed some critical points he would like clarified, now if not sooner. Draco mustered his best and most polite behavior and wondered if he would leave with his soul, his magic, and his testicles intact. At least 2 out of 3 at the minimum. 3 would be better. 3 was his definite goal for the night. Luna oddly seemed unconcerned. She poured tea for the living, then the unreal, then poured out the rest of the pot with a muttered prayer to absent friends. Dropping a single drop of her own blood in the cup, she tipped the empty tea pot over it, and Draco tried not to react as silver light poured like hot tea, even steaming, into the cup, which she offered to the Ravenclaw ghost. Draco held his own in conversation, while sweating out at least twice as much fluid as the tea was pouring in. The elven ladies were like his mother, without any morality or limitations, which, considering Narcissa Black's well-earned reputation, was something Draco had not thought was possible. They were bright, intelligent, and amoral in the way that sharks can only dream of being. They were civilized, and Draco swiftly came to realize that the only rules that constrained these beings of ancient power and magic were those of courtesy, and Luna Lovegood was talking to them. It was possible Draco had been more afraid, but he could not remember when. Luna had no fear, nor conversational filter, and the elven ladies took delight in the wild human girl who dared to invite pale queens of fairy to tea. The Silver Lady matched the elven ladies for grace and poise, but her mother had often guested the good neighbors when she lived, and the rules of the court of the pale princes Underhill were known to her of old. Of the elven ladies had complimented Luna on finding and training Draco to an acceptable degree of courtesy and honesty, but warned her against the human male's inevitable betrayal. They had gone on for several minutes to list ways she could bind Draco's heart and soul to her eternal servitude, which he was oddly glad his mother could not hear, just in case, and he was warmed to hear Luna protest. Draco is a good boy, and he will make a fine man one day, unless he makes a fine dragon. I don't mind, I never plan to lay eggs, but if a girl won't lay an egg, she can't really say she loves a man, can she? Or is that love's a dragon? I get confused. Men are much more trustworthy now, Luna admitted. The Silver Lady spoke softly. I thought that was true once. I knew a boy, or thought I knew a boy, a promising wizard. Tom Riddle was his name. I talked to him, and he to me. He shared his heart and his dreams with me, and I with him. He shared with me his greatest treasure, the ring of his father's, the ring of Gaunt that he had stolen from the last lord of that house when he decided to become the heir of Slytherin. Draco froze, knowing this was the history of Tom Marvolo Riddle, the heir of Slytherin, Lord Voldemort. The Silver Lady looked down. I shared my own shame, that I had stolen my mother's diadem and hidden it in Albania. Mother had sent the bloody Baron after me, and when I refused to return we fought, and he killed first me, and them himself. The diadem lay where my bones did, even as my soul returned here to forever serve the house of my mother for the crime of robbing her and it of her greatest legacy. The Silver Lady looked up, her face transformed with rage, and for the first time Draco feared the beloved Ravenclaw ghost. When he returned, he had betrayed me. He had cut a part of his very soul, needing to murder another just to have the power to bind it, and bound a bit of his evil soul to not only my mother's diadem, but his father's ring. He turned my mother's greatest treasure into a Horcrux and hid it in the room of lost things here in the castle, where no man can find it. He hid the ring of his father's back in the fallen manor of his family, hiding each of his soul anchors behind magic deep, and strange enough, its foulness could not easily be seen, even if you knew to look for the abominations. He took my trust and used me to betray my mother a second time. He turned my mother's legacy into something that taints the very stones and magic of Hogwarts, even as his own family ring taints and corrupts the stones of his ancestral hearth. Tom Riddle only claimed to love and value two places as his home, and he hid Horcruxes in both of them. No, Luna, men have not changed. They are liars and scum. Bind this one. Bind him before he betrays you. Draco, to his credit, was too shocked by the revelation of two Horcrux to realize he was in mortal danger, or immortal danger depending on what solution for his male inevitable betrayal was chosen. Luna turned to Draco, her eyes serious, her magic welling up inside her. Wand in hand, she turned, and all Draco had time to realize was that it was too late for him to dodge or free his own wand. Scourgify, Luna said as the spell hit Draco in the throat, or more precisely in the cravat. Luna looked at him fiercely. Your mother gave you that cravat. You had a berry stain on it, and she would not be pleased. The Silver Lady asked, sounding shocked. You are not going to bind him? Luna looked surprised, and planted a chaste kiss on his cheek. He is my dragon. They do not do well leashed. The two elven ladies sighed. One whispered, young love. The second tittered. It will end in tragic betrayal. They both sighed, loving love as much as they loved betrayal. A good time was had by all, except perhaps Draco, who would need years of therapy to get over this tea party, even though he was sure there would be more in his future, and Draco remembered to send an owl to Sirius, and his mother about the nature and location of two of the three outstanding Horcrux. The greenhouse gate, Hogwarts. Three sisters in black dragon-scale armor stalked from the forest, their armor slick with blood, their black crow eyes bright, their laughter fierce. Pomona Sprout stood before the gate, her legs planted shoulder-width apart, her hands on her hips. "You shall not pass." Pomona Sprout stated softly. The Morrigan sneered. "We are invited." Crow Barnaby laughed. "We hunger." Matcher crooned. "We have needs." Blood littered the ground as it fell from them. What creature dared to face them, or what had failed to flee fast enough before them, she did not know. These were creatures of the wild and fairy, who some had called and worshipped as goddesses in ancient times. No power Professor Sprout could command, including the Hufflepuff Cup, could stay them should the three sisters choose to kill. They could not be stopped, they could not be bound, but they could be placated. It was the custom in ancient times to set the offering before the door, outside the gates, that the wickedest fairies, the crow goddesses of slaughter and battle, the dark witches of earth and root, of rock and tree, find what they need in field and farm, flock and forest, and be fully satisfied before they pass your door and family. Neville Longbottom stepped forward. His wand blazed gold in the black of the night, and the scythe of his rune, Jira the harvest, the bounty taken in time, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth shone in his hand and blazed from his chest. He reached down into the earth for the power that slept within it and called. The earth answered. Green life tore from the earth, months of growth in heartbeats as the Lord of the land held forth his hand and demanded abundance, and Mother Earth herself gave answer. The Morrigan stood, her eyes hooded, her face unreadable. "He was taken from me, my Dagda. He was taken from me, and not even his child within me to console me. I will have my due, a life for a life." Neville Longbottom held out his hand, and the Morrigan took it. Crow Barnaby took the other, and Matcher trailed her hand in his hair as they led him away to the soft grass of the fields, where the Lord of the land would see if he could repay the life of a lost elven lord, gone before his first ancestor thought to put his keel out to sea and seek the Isles of Britain. Pomona Sprout sighed. "I definitely owe Augusta an apology for this, throwing her son under three fairy queens just to keep them from murdering students." Professor Sprout felt the song of the earth change, the killing song of the fairy slowing and merging with the soft song of life and love, the song of beginnings, not endings. Poor Neville, if he survives the night, he will be a very tired wizard. She listened for a time and felt the song of the earth begin to sing with joy and smiled. She would send Augusta a gift basket. She had a feeling her main problem in the coming weeks would be an overabundance from the fields, greenhouses, and flocks. The ecstatic cry of a crow shattered the night. Pomona Sprout smiled. She did love those old-fashioned magics. If Dumbledore didn't have such a stick up his ass, he would remember not all ritual sacrifices were about power or killing. A second crow gave voice to its delight. She was going to have one tired badger tomorrow, but sometimes life, not death, was the right offering. She could see the small herd of unicorns come from the forest to circle the happy, well, not couple obviously, but certainly coupling. Neville was her most innocent badger, and if the Morrigan bound to him, the odds of her wetting her blades on students dropped to near nil. Humming a happy tune, she went inside. She would at least provide Neville his privacy, assuming you could ignore the unicorns.